Okay, good evening, everyone here in the town center and dialing in remotely and watching this later. Welcome to the special budget meeting of the Town of Richmond Select Board for December 11th, 2023. This is the third special budget meeting that we have held off on the off weeks to discuss the budget. We had one in October, one in November, and this is the third one. We have tentatively discussed having a fourth one if necessary, but stress on if necessary. If we can get things covered tonight, then we won't need that. Is there any public comment from anybody, person or coming in from the Zoom? Seeing none. Are there any additions, deletions, or modifications to the agenda? Seeing none. Then we will move on into our agenda. Our first item on the agenda is a review of the draft town meeting warning. As you know, town meeting is coming up on March 5th, and we have to dot our I's and cross our T's legally. I'm going to hush up and let Town Manager Josh Arneson help us with those I's and T's.
Okay. So this is our first draft that Town Clerk Linda Parent helped me put together. So just wanted to get, sort of initial feedback from the board. We've got a couple placeholders. You can see items there in red. But it's got our normal heading. It's just the annual town meeting. It used to include the school, but hasn't for a number of years now. We've got a few articles, got elect officers by ballot, hearing accept reports to town officers, which will happen during town meeting. A placeholder for the budget, which once we finalize the budget number, we'll put that in there into the spot that has the X's. A placeholder for the town center renovation bond, which we will have more information on shortly, and official wording. A placeholder here for the Conservation Reserve Fund. It's on the agenda this evening to talk about how we would like to fund that. So that's a bit of a placeholder with possibility changing the funding / calculation amount. Transact any other business that may come before the meeting on town meeting day, and then the signatures, and then some special notes for when we're going to have the information meeting, which has to be 10 days prior to, or within the 10-day window prior to town meeting. So one thing, you don't have to decide it tonight, but we might want to start thinking about when do we want to hold that meeting. Pre-COVID, I think we would always do it sort of in conjunction with the select board meeting the Monday night prior to the Tuesday. But seeing as how our meetings are now going 3.5 hours for regular select board meetings, that may not be the easiest night to handle, because I'm thinking there's at least two items between the bond vote, conservation, and the budget, and we could probably easily spend a half hour on each of those, even in a pre-meeting. So I'm suggesting maybe we do it the Monday prior, which would be the last Monday in February and still within 10 days, just to give us a night to go through things. Sometimes those meetings aren't super well attended because people are really kind of gearing up for the actual meeting. I think in the past we've had a couple people show up, but that's pre-Zoom. So
you're thinking the 26th of February? That's
what I'm thinking. 26th of February. I'm also thinking we might be able to do it in this room since we have the hybrid capability and we don't usually get a lot of in person. But also wanted, because if we go over to the library, it is a bit of a haul to set everything up, bring it all over there. And if we don't get people showing up, it's a little bit of a disappointment. And going up to Kemble's Hump, they've had challenges with meetings going beyond, I think, like 8 o'clock at night, because they're trying to get their staff out of there. And I haven't, if you want to look into that, we can look into that. They're also on break that week. So I'm not sure what that changes for their staffing and their availability.
Thoughts from the board about that information session and its scheduling?
In years past, we've sort of set the select board meeting aside for the informational meeting, but I don't know if we'll have that luxury this year because we have so much going on. So I do like the idea of a separate standalone meeting. And I think this room should accommodate the mass of 2 or 3 people that will show up.
I will only say I have a conflict on the 26th until 7, so I could probably show in later than that.
Lisa, Jeff, thoughts?
I can do the 26th. Note that it's school vacation, so that hurts, but 10 days before town meeting, all school vacation. I don't know, if somebody ought to talk to the legislature about changing that 10-day window, maybe. But the 26th would work for me.
I have no problem with it. Lisa is checking her calendar.
Yeah.
So Bart, you'd be available, but not until 7, so you might be a few minutes late, assuming your appointment is local.
I think it'll be virtual. It's actually, I'm chairing the UPWP meeting.
Oh,
Regional planning.
nice.
Lucky me.
And typically those meetings, you'll give
Lisa's
the
granddaughter's birthday.
presentation that you would give at a meeting, right?
Yeah, so for the budget, I'll give the full budget presentation, and if there's any questions from the board or the public, answer those questions. In the past, there's only been a couple people that attended with questions. It's usually saved for the next day. We would also usually, I think, invite the Conservation Commission. They usually have a bit of a presentation on the request for that ballot item. And we could give the presentation about the town center bond vote as well.
Just wanted to peek at one thing. Go
Will
ahead.
we be able to do those presentations on town meeting day as well, considering that there's a vote then on Australian ballot?
I think so. I mean, I remember there was some conversation about whether that was legal or not to do that. I'll double check. I mean, we always give the budget presentation on town meeting day and it's voted from the floor.
It's voted from the floor.
Yeah.
My recollection is there was a change
Yeah,
in the law that allows us to discuss items that are on Australian ballot.
Okay, let's
That's your
verify.
recollection?
I'll verify that.
There's one other thought that I'm not seeing in the warning, but I don't know that it needs to be. Because we've changed town meeting from Monday evening back to Tuesday. There are people who have spoken to me recently and said, we're still meeting on Monday night, right? And I've said, no, we changed it back. I think we will want to take special effort to communicate that it is back on the same day. And I believe Linda messaged us to say, I don't know if it was just me or everybody, that it's the Richmond Senior Center who will be doing the food that day, which is very nice of them. I know that social outlet is very important to some people.
We should make an announcement at the beginning of every select board meeting as well as putting it in the front porch forum, because no matter how much we get the word out, people are still not gonna get the word.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And maybe the sign out front, put that out substantially in advance.
Mhm.
All right. So
And I hear we have a PA system that's being donated by the middle school. So we don't have to buy one ourselves. That's,
Oh.
thank you.
I got a couple of bullhorns if we,
My understanding from Linda is that
Yeah,
that was resolved.
yeah, I
We
mean,
don't have to all share the mic.
well,
Such as it.
isn't it the same PA system that we've used from the middle school? I'll to ask Linda, because I know there was initial, if we wouldn't be able to use it, then we would. And I know in years past, there's always been some hiccup or another with the AV system. There's always been something that isn't quite right.
However, if we had to do it ourselves, if we had to rent it.
Oh, it'd be a couple
$1,000
Yeah,
for what, 3 hours, which might even be longer than that. And so like,
yeah.
it's
We could buy it for 1,200.
right. Well, and so, you know, I just thank the school district for loaning us their.
yes.
All right,
Okay.
I think that gets us consensus. We'll probably bring this back next select board meeting or two, just as it kind of continues to develop in case there's anything that anybody catches. We can
So-
make changes.
Just to close, the 26th at 7 here and virtually.
Yep. But I got,
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you all for your
yeah, thank you.
feedback. Okay, our next item on the agenda does bring us to the Conservation Reserve Fund. And that is there is I'm quoting from the memo. There was a question whether the Conservation Reserve Fund can be changed from 1 cent. Josh reached out to Attorney Robert Fletcher on this. Can you summarize or?
Yeah, essentially it can be changed. The 1 cent was in place, I think, for the first few years, but because it's voted on every year and it's a new ballot item every year, that ballot item can be changed to, you know, a fixed fee. It can be 1 cent. It could be whatever you guys kind of determine and want to put on the ballot.
So the memo for which people listening on the Zoom will not have seen, it's pointed out that because the grand list has gone up, the 1 cent tax that had been raising about $50,000 would now raise $78,000 with the current grand list value.
Right.
And so I would assume that when we're discussing changing it, we might be changing it downward like 0.8 cents.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that's worthy of a
It
discussion.
is worthy of discussion. But it's not necessarily going up. It could go in either direction.
Could go either way you want,
Depends on
up or
what, how
down.
much
It
money
could-
is
It
needed.
could be a fixed fee, and I also want to note that the Conservation Commission is going to be discussing this tomorrow at their meeting.
Mhm.
So they might be able to come back to the meeting next Monday with some more thoughts from their commission, which they've been very involved, obviously, in that fund.
So we don't have to vote on this tonight.
No,
Okay.
you have to make a final decision when you finalize the warning, which would be kind of mid-January.
The one thing that I'll point out is that, our grand list went up by 2/3, right? It's about 67%. Okay, that's reflective of the real estate market. So a big piece of what the Conservation Reserve Fund does is deal with real estate. And so this hasn't changed since our last reappraisal, like 211 or something.
The last full one was definitely over 10 years ago.
So it's a long time ago, and the real estate market has changed. We don't change this very often. So both our grant list is catching up with reality. And I think that could be applied to this as well. So 1 cent is representative of the similar proportion to what the grand list was before reappraisal. So just something to take into consideration.
That's right. Any other thoughts on the Conservation Reserve Fund funding? Any other thoughts about anything relating to it? Lisa, you look like you're deep in thought.
Shallow. I guess the Conservation Reserve Fund is allocated strictly for that. Is that right?
It is, yeah, it has its own guidelines and policy that has to be followed for, and it can only be spent on certain things that are conservation related.
But the select board has authority or some
Yep,
authority?
so basically the way it works is proposals go to the Conservation Commission. They vote on recommending those, and then they go to the select board with the Conservation Commission's recommendation, and then the board has final say on if it's going to be funded or not. And following the guidelines on that usually.
No questions.
So noting that pathway, does it seem prudent or rational to say, well, it could go up, it could go down, it could stay the same, and ask the Conservation Fund to have or Conservation Commission rather, to have a conversation?
I think
I
and
believe
then
that should
bring it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can bring it back next Monday,
Or table
that'd
it.
be great.
because they're going to have a conversation tomorrow.
Mm.
And Judy's here. I don't know if she has more to add.
Indeed, Judy,
but
or-
that seems to be the next steps.
Hi, yeah, we have discussed this. There are several different issues that come up, but if we could have a chance to bring it up at the next meeting, that would be really helpful.
Absolutely.
You also might consider that there's a policy that governs the Conservation Reserve Fund, so any changes that are made in the ballot should be reflected in the policy.
Oh, are you referring to the policy talks about the 1 cent vote? I think the policy talks about that.
Yeah, yep. And also the frequency of the renewal, because in the policy, it's every 5 years.
Right, and that changed about 5 years ago.
Right, but we haven't changed the policy to reflect that, so
Good point.
just a thought.
But I believe the draft agenda that Josh shared with me today,
The updated one had conservation
Right.
in there. As a separate item rather than just review of the
Mhm.
of the warning. I think that probably makes
but that will
sense.
be on next Monday's agenda. Bart?
I would only observe in revising a policy, it seems to me imprudent to refer to voting obligations that govern by statute in a policy. That I think the policy should not state them, but refer to them by reference or be silent on them, because we run the risk of continually having outdated policies because it has language from some past reality.
Or, while hopefully unlikely, a future select board changing the policy to conflict with the state policy under the assumption that they can because it's in the policy.
It's for fun.
Okay, anything further Okay, then I believe we are
Thanks.
ready to move to, thank you very much, Judy. I apologize. I believe we're now ready to move into item C on the agenda, which is a review of the draft fiscal year 25 budget. And so again, I will all silent and look to the town manager.
Sure, so. I'm gonna start here, Right, so I guess before we get into department by department, I put on that we can start talking about unassigned and restricted funds, then we'll go from there, we'll kind of go over some changes that have happened throughout the entire budget, and then we'll get into the budget itself. So wanted to start with unassigned and restricted because it is kind of a big portion of what is going to drive the tax rate. Last year, we used about $500,000 to offset the tax rate. This year, after last meeting, the conversation was to drop that to 140,000 based on what we had. So Connie and I took a look and we have some updates just because things have changed since last meeting. Let me try to share this in a way it's a little bit better to see. And how is that as far as?
I think that's probably about as big as you're gonna be able to get it
I
without.
think so. I'm getting,
Yeah, which one are we looking at?
I mean, you could hide the ribbon, but
okay. So this is essentially what we looked at last time with a few updates. So this is the audited balance for restricted funds at the end of FY 23. We have $708,712. Projected changes that are coming in the current fiscal year, which is FY 24. We have 500,000 used as an offset for the tax rate. We did receive the $159,000 from FEMA. This was an unbudgeted reimbursement from FEMA. This relates back to the Thompson Road culvert replacement from the Halloween storm of 2019. So we've received that. We also received $4,474. This is for the management costs, so the administrative time that was put into that storm as well. So that money has been received. But then unbudgeted expenses for the July flood have increased. I think they were around 440 or so at the last meeting, but now they're up to 468 because we had some more invoices that came in. So that's going to be a net effect of a negative $800,000 in restricted funds. That brings us down to actually negative 95,000 at the end of FY 24 if everything stays on budget here. Per the policy, this is 15% of what we currently have in the highway budget going into FY 25. So that's what we should have on hand per the policy we have as far as 15% of the budget. So we're short by $387,000 restricted. I'm going to pause because Bar's got a question.
I'm looking at the title of row 8, unbudgeted expenses, July flood. Are those FEMA reimbursable?
Yes.
I think we should note that in the title of that figure.
Yeah.
Because it, as presented, it suggests like we're just out the money,
Right.
but it really is kind of a loan to ourselves.
that's accurate.
Yeah. That's a good point. Although at this point, we don't know exactly when that's going to be coming back, and they'll get that
Sure.
on the next one. But you're right. It's not like that's gone forever.
We just have, it's hard to plan because we do not know when we'll get it.
We don't, and I've been trying to ask FEMA when we're gonna get it, and I've got a meeting with them on Wednesday. We're gonna go over actually our first damaged site by looking at the cost we had for volunteers green and debris removal. But early email back from my contact there is she doesn't really have an estimated time, and then I got an email from VLCT who was copied saying, yeah, I would plan on not in the next 6 months, so that doesn't really help us with this budget, unfortunately. I was hoping that maybe we would get things moving and we'd have things faster. So we did a similar exercise for unassigned funds. We finished the fiscal year 23 at 922,000. We don't have any projected budgeted expenses or unbudgeted revenue in this for 24.
I'm sorry. So we finished the year with
Oh, we
922.
922.
Is that what you said?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry, maybe I went too fast. So we finished FY 23 with $922,000 in unassigned funds. We don't have anything in the budget. We don't have anything unplanned that we're seeing right now, like a FEMA event that we're drawing money on this from. So if everything comes in directly on budget, we'll be at 922 at the end of this year. 15% of the general fund budget is $427,000. So that, wait a minute. Yeah, that leaves us at $494,000 over on unassigned funds as it relates to 15% of the general fund. If you look at these combined, we look at about $827,000 at the end of FY '24 as a projection. $720,000 is 15% of the combined general fund budget and highway, which means that we would have about $107,000 over that combined
To
total
use for reducing the tax rate.
to use for reducing the tax rate. And last time we looked at that, that's the number that was at about 140. So that we kept that in the budget at 140, but just wanted to, with the conservative estimate, that's where we're at with this. Then I wanted to look at a couple of things that we think, could actually happen this year. So this is essentially the same chart, but the portions that I highlighted here in yellow are things that could come in. So, and I think have a reasonable chance of coming in within the next 6 months or so. So mentioning the Halloween flooding, we have received all the money that we need to receive from FEMA on this, but
That's
then
2019, right?
that's 2019.
Yep.
But there is still a state portion of this that's to be paid out, and that gets paid out after FEMA has closed everything out. And now that they've paid the construction costs and the management fees, that's closed out, or it's moving towards closeout. And then once it closes out, the state will pay, and their portion is estimated right now at $42,000. So I think we'll reasonably get that. That then
Reduces the deficit.
reduces the deficit from 92 to 52, or not 92. And then in unassigned funds, just looking right now in interest, we are fairly over in the interest that we've received to date. We had $14,000 budgeted for the entire year. We're currently at about 75,000 in interest through the first 5.5 months or so. So that projects out to at least $150,000, maybe more once everything settles out. So I think we could safely assume we're going to be about $136,000 over in interest received. And then looking at vacancy savings in police, right now, police expenses, and again, this is through, I think, mid-December, we're at $176,000. The total FY '24 police budget is $710,000. So if everything was in an exact mirror, it would project out to $385,000 in spending by the end of FY '24, which is a savings of $325,000 to budget. But we do need to allow for some hiring that we think is coming in the next couple months. And Chief Cambridge has been going through and kind of restocking the police department in effect with some necessary items that have been overlooked over the past couple of years. So conservatively, I feel like we'll probably still be under at least $100,000. So if we made those changes, then the combined that we would be over 15% is about $386,000. So I wanted to put another number out there for the board to consider as we budget this out and try to figure out the tax savings.
Okay, so the 386,000 includes the 236,000 from the yellow area and the 42,611 from up above.
Yes.
Okay, Bart.
I think I know what the answer is, but I'd like to get it sort of in the record. Are there any circumstances, well, let me back up. For small towns that are hit heavily by FEMA events, if I can use that term, they may have to borrow money. A small town, it's out like all sorts of damage. Are there any circumstances in which FEMA covers not only the cost of the expense, but the cost of the interest to borrow money pending FEMA reimbursement?
I do not know the answer to that question as far as the interest. I don't know if Connie did a little more digging into that. Do you know the answer to that?
I do not.
Okay.
I don't know what to say other than I think it's a relevant and important question because we're using our money to avoid borrowing money. And if we borrowed money and they paid the cost of the interest, then their money, borrowed money, would be better than our money, arguably.
Well, we spent unanticipated funds, they reimburse us. The interest is unanticipated too, so.
And I'm sorry, I haven't thought of this before. I just think I'm picturing a small town with 200 residents and it like gets wiped out by a mudslide and they're out $1 million or $5 million. They don't have any of that money. They got to borrow the money.
And that interest could be equivalent to their annual budget almost, you know.
So that's my only thought. It's probably worth verifying or that they don't, or the circumstances in which they do. Does that make sense?
It does.
We're
Good
making
question to
over
ask.
4% now and on our, the CDs we have in the bank at $150,000 worth of interest. We're doing pretty well on that.
On the interest, yes.
And but of course, that's not just CD interest. We also have the TD Bank.
Our regular account's been earning a decent amount of interest as well because that balance has been high. The interest rates have been higher than we budgeted. Connie's got maybe more.
And
than
we did a year or so ago when June was still chair, we did look at, we comparison shopped with other banks as far as was TD Bank really giving us the best deal? And in my opinion, far and away they were. We should, we obviously need to keep checking, but I don't know of anything that has changed.
It's unfortunate that it's.
Connie, go ahead.
Yeah.
On the CDs, Jay, we check every time before we ask to
Absolutely.
renew one. I check several banks and yeah, TD is always the best. On the topic of the interest, my guess, Bard, would be no, because we don't get any allowance when we've paid for this stuff and they've not reimbursed us for 4 or 5 years. There's no allowance for, we're using our money. They don't give us any compensation for loss of that money.
Yeah, thanks. That is my guess also, but I'm thinking rather than guessing, we should.
I'll ask in my meeting on Wednesday and
Yeah.
I'll let you guys know probably next week.
And Connie, my reference to having shopped around when June was chair was not a reference to the CDs. It was a reference to the other arrangements.
Was a sweep account. Yeah.
Right, that whole,
Right.
That definitely wasn't working. I had a conversation with John recently and he said TD Bank picked up a lot of people who were doing sweep accounts at other banks.
right. They don't, what TD does, you don't have to put the money all in one account. You can leave it where it is and they will pay interest as though it were in a sweep account. Jeff, go ahead.
So this is where I get a little fuzzy on the difference between restricted funds and unassigned funds. So that is at 396,000 is a combination of both restricted and unassigned funds. Does that mean we can spend it on things other than any of that on things that aren't restricted?
This 386 you're looking here at the bottom. Yes. So it's because it's basically all in the unassigned funds that could be spent on anything in the budget, including highway.
Okay.
If it was flipped and we had more money in the highway or the restricted side, then we would only be able to spend that on highway and we couldn't overspend anywhere else. But usually when we have a FEMA event, 90% of that is highway money. There's a little water and sewer sometimes and admin.
Connie?
So, I mean, I think this shows it pretty clearly, and the auditors have said it. We cannot carry a negative balance in those restricted funds, so it automatically zeroes out and comes out of the assigned funds. But I do want to point out as we look at these theoretical amounts, we're not allowing for another FEMA event.
Right.
So we can guess that, yeah, we're going to make more interest and yeah, we're going to have police savings. But the reality is with the restricted funds being a negative balance, the next event we have will take our unassigned funds below that 15% that we have in our policy now. So that's when we would have to get into taking a loan, unless we still have the ARPA funds sitting there, because the ARPA helps our cash flow, but we certainly would have to back off the CDs.
Which to me illustrates the importance of asking are there ever any circumstances under which they cover interest payments? Because it's not only this, but other future possible events. And let's say, while we don't plan future FEMA events, we can expect that they will occur.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts from anybody else on the call about the projected balances and usage of unassigned and restricted funds? Not seeing any hands going up. Last meeting, we had people physically holding their hand up that I didn't see, so Don't see any of those either. Okay. So our next item on the agenda under the heading of review of draft budget, are we prepared, ready to go into the library?
Yes, before we get into the library directly, though, I just want to cover a couple of things that have changed, because as we get to each department, we'll go over things that have changed since the last meeting that we had in October, or November. But there's about 3 things here that have changed, sort of affected all departments. We updated all the passive insurance lines based on the invoices that we received for calendar year 2024. Prior to this, we were still basing it on the calendar year 2023. We corrected an error in the last version of the budget, which still had 2023 health insurance rates. So this version is now updated with the 2024 health insurance rates. And we got the numbers from VEMR's, so the contribution amount for retirement from the town has increased from 6.75 to 7% for non-police, and from 11.1 to 11.35% for police. So that's the percentage that the town pays of every dollar that is paid to employees. So we've updated all the VEMR's lines across all the departments. Any questions on that before we move into the library? Okay,
Okay, seeing none.
so the library,
Jeff has a question.
oh, Jeff did,
Just on the library, a couple of things.
oh, library, yep.
Move in the library, okay.
I see we have $3,000 budgeted for technology, public use room.
So that was, go ahead, I was gonna cover that, but go ahead.
Okay, so, I'm wondering if that's is that set up for Zoom? Is it, is that the community room?
That's the community room where they have the community computers and printers and fax machines. So I don't think it's set up for a meeting so much
It's
as
not
it
very big.
is, if people come in and use the
Yeah.
computers.
So we might want to think about doing that. If we do, the bond is successful, we're going to have to shuffle things around.
True.
It's not unlikely that we will be meeting over there as a board or for other things. So, you might want to think about, both the community room and even the rooms, on the mezzanine as potential meeting rooms for town related, because we'll have to find space. And if we can find our own space, that's better than going out and renting space.
Yeah.
So there's that. The electrical vehicle charging station, is a little bit further down. That's offset by revenue.
Yep.
So that I just wanted to point out that doesn't really cost us. That we get paid back by charge point, for, and the electricity that's used for that. And, I have a question on reserves. So we have the last item is library reserves. So we're putting money into a library account. Okay, I'm assuming that's for building.
Just one sec.
Oh, yeah, that was Chris.
I'm just asking the question. I don't know. I'm wondering if it might be redundant with the town center and library reserve. We've been using the town center and library reserve for much of the, most of what we spent money on has actually been the library, and there's still some more things to, shoes to drop over there. But do we need to be putting money from the library budget towards reserves if we are building the town center and library reserve fund from revenue from rent?
So yes, you do.
Oh.
So the library reserve fund is for things that I guess the equivalent is a leaseholder. It's not the structure. It is things like interior painting, flooring, replacement of air conditioners that fail, heating systems, stuff like that. It's sort of like, what the leaseholder would do to the building, whereas the town center fund, I think, has been depicted as the capital improvements and maintenance on the building itself.
That's a fair distinction. I just wanted to point it out. And one of the things that I think that we can talk about later on is once we do this renovation project, will we need all of the revenue from rent to go into the town center reserve fund for maintenance when, at least for a few years, our maintenance problems here should be less, So what I plan on doing is having that discussion with the town center committee on Thursday. What it would be a reasonable, maintenance budget for, this building and the library. I think we have some, a couple of larger capital projects at the library still left to do. So I don't know the answer to that yet, but I'd like to come back to that, after we've had that conversation at the town center committee.
One thing to keep in mind that I would want to revisit the language in the vote that we had a couple of years ago to kind of reinforce the town center fund. I think it might have talked about the revenues from the renters. And if that's the case, if we want to make a change, we just have to go back to the voters. But just to keep in the back of our mind, if we're talking about reducing the amount that goes into the fund.
I'm pretty sure that it can, I see what you're saying. Could it go to, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Well, in a sense, if you're using, say, half of it to pay off a bond for repairs to this building.
Yeah.
That's going towards a capital project towards this building.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were going there, or if you were thinking we could put some of that into the regular budget as a revenue offset in the future. But either way, we just have to double check to make sure we know what we have authority to do when we go back to the voters for. But good ideas.
Jeff, just an unrelated question, but sort of relevant, I guess. The operating costs for the new utilities and the town center and so forth, is that something that's gone into our future budget, or are we just going with what we know?
Right now, I think it's based on our previous usage.
Yeah.
What I'm assuming, so the two operable things for this building are heat and electricity. The heat item is going to go down because we're not going to, we won't have a natural gas boiler. So it's all going to be electricity. However, the heat load of the building will go down quite a bit with new windows and air sealing, better lighting, and new cooling equipment. All of that will reduce the electric load, our existing electric load, actually quite a bit. And it'll reduce the heat load from the building. My understanding is natural gas is comparable to electricity, kind of, for cost per BTU. But maybe not for the equipment that we have, but we will, what we're speccing is high efficiency equipment for heating.
Okay, Connie?
So one thing, and this goes right along with what Rebecca's saying for the library, is on the town center side, we have the building maintenance line in admin, which is directly offset by the revenue side. So Jeff, if those expenses go down, the revenue's also going down. It's basically a wash. And I think, like Rebecca was saying with the library, it's for painting and things like that. In the case of the building maintenance for the town center, it's also, for service and repairs that come along that need to be addressed. And then the utility is a separate line.
Okay. Any other thoughts pertaining to the library portion of the budget? Okay, then the moment you've all been waiting for, the fire department.
So, with the fire department, there's been no changes to the budget, other than the ones that affected every budget line that we talked about earlier since the last meeting. The one thing that Connie did provide was a look at if we changed the upcoming expenses from reserve expenses to going up for a bond vote. So we've included a schedule in here, which where's that schedule?
Yeah, that's not heat pump.
Yeah.
That's electric resistance.
So she looked at basically the next 15 years, and it would actually lower the amount of taxes needed to be raised. So we've created two columns here. Taxes raised each year if we continue with paying out of reserves and taxes raised each year, if we transitioned everything to a loan, it does reduce, you can see the amount that we would actually have to raise in taxes with loans over the next 15 years. But as you project that out over the life of these loans, which go out, as you can see, FY 44, 48, 46, far beyond 15 years, we would end up long-term paying about $1.5 million in interest. So beyond that 15 years, the pendulum would swing the other way, where we would then be paying more per year with the loan model than the reserve model. But it was a question that came up at last meeting, so we wanted to explore that some more and give some more information. And one note I think that maybe Connie will jump in is, if we decide to start to make that change, we sort of need to stick with that change. We can't say, oh, we're going to do loans and then go back to reserve. So it's right. It's long-term planning. Connie's got her hand up. If you want to go there.
Yeah, Connie.
That's all I had.
Connie?
So the main reason that it's looking so low in those beginning years, starting in fiscal year 25, is because we won't have any loans stacked on top of each other. That's the only reason. Once we start stacking those loans, like Josh just said, you're in it for the long haul, because all those loans are 15-year loans. And that, believe it or not, that's that 1.5 million in interest. It's based on today's interest. So we're forecasting. It's based on cost that we have now, which is forecasting. I doubt things are going to be what I am currently showing for cost. It's tricky to look at. So my job is looking at it for the overall financial health of the town. I say don't do loans if you don't have to, but there's two very different philosophies that the public have, those that are in favor and those that aren't. Why should we pay now for something in the future? Or why should somebody in the future have to pay for something that was decided 5 years ago?
Right, it's the whole, I want to buy a new hot tub. I can put in my credit cards to have it now, but pay more over a lifetime. Or I can just, defer gratification, put a little bit of money down until I can pay for it cash. I would prefer to do the Roger Brown model and not do loans.
So the lowest overall cost.
Any thoughts? Jeff?
So, I'd point out for the heat and electricity, I am an energy guy.
Wow.
On the heat and electricity, we should be able to do better. So we're doing an energy audit this spring on that building. There's a proposal to put in a heat pump system. We already have money set aside for that. And if we do, we'll be able to space heat the building rather than using a boiler, which should bring down the cost of heat. It will probably raise the cost of electricity, but not as much as the heat. It'll bring down the cost of heat. So that's in our favor. A question on equipment purchases. The equipment of purchases, I'm assuming, is for like personal protection equipment and stuff not related to the building or the trucks. Right?
No.
Right? Is
The
that correct?
safety equipment reserve is for the equipment that the firefighters use.
Okay.
The other equipment is things like jaws of life, generators, pumps.
Air packs.
Okay.
No, air packs would be under
Okay.
safety equipment and gear.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So should we be putting money in reserves and spending money out of reserves for this line item?
For the safety equipment?
Yeah, should we be spending any of the money from reserves on safety equipment to bring down this line item? Because we could do that. That would be I think we have a reserve fund for equipment, right? For fire?
For the safety equipment?
Jeff, we are. All the safety equipment that we buy is now being bought out of the safety equipment reserve. We did it this way because it's really not an even flow we're not buying the same exact thing every year. Some years we need air packs, some years we don't. So we're kind of trying to keep a nice level reserve, but anything that the fire department is buying that is safety equipment is paid for. the safety equipment reserve. And we have that extra page now that that shows what we're spending the reserves on.
Yeah, I see.
So air tanks and things like that are not coming out of the budget anywhere. They strictly come out of the reserve that we're contributing to.
So I would point out that for example, we have $29,000 in the fire department impact fees. That you could conceivably spend it on equipment for the fire department that would be a legitimate use. And that would reduce the fire department expenses. Is that correct?
You're trying to see, is there anything in the budget that we can spend out of reserves instead of raising taxes for?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that might pivot us away from safety equipment, because I think that's
That's equipment in general,
Yeah, so
$35,000.
if you're looking at the equipment in general, I think, and Dennis and Jerry can jump in. I mean, my mind would maybe go to, we've got, the equipment purchase of 35,000. Like, is there anything in there that we could use impact fee revenue for that would be legal to use that for? Maybe you don't know off the top of your head, but I know there's certain things you can use impact fee money for and certain things you can't.
Could we put it towards one of the new trucks that we just voted on to purchase?
The equipment, Connie, do you know the answer to that? I'm not that familiar with impact fee restrictions.
Many, many years ago, back when Tom was still here, there was one year that he used some of the impact fees for the down deposit on the fire truck. It is tricky. There are legal restrictions. And it's basically related to the growth. What are the things that you would spend it on that are related to the growth of the town? It's a reserve, but there's not much in it, Jeff, and it doesn't go up much. It takes a very long time to get it to 50,000.
So we don't have to do this right now, but I'm just suggesting that might be, if we need to find some ways of reducing the increase, this might be a way to do it by using reserve funds for something that we were going to use as an expense.
Can we
Right.
go back to the budget page?
Yep.
Let's do the reserve account page. Towards the bottom of fire.
So that's 35 there.
So what sticks out for people, I think, is the fire capital reserve. Would you, if I'm reading this, the uninitiated, it goes from 55 to 150 to 220. In 1 year, it's a 47% increase.
Right. So that goes back to the discussion we started off the fire budget with, as far as how are we funding for these larger capital purchases. So when we look out as far as trucks that need to be purchased, addition that needs to be purchased for the fire station, that's what we need to raise right now in order to avoid having loans in the future. I can pull up the capital plan. That might help show that a little bit as well.
I just, somebody going through the budget, they're gonna, even if they support the fire department, they're gonna go, hey, wait, I went from 55 to 220 in 2 years. That's real money.
So this year coming up, we're gonna be paying about 267,000 for one new truck. And then we signed the contract on 9/11. 800 working days from there, we're gonna be buying a $480,000 fire truck. So Connie figured out the increases we need, so we wouldn't have to take a loan.
So that's what the voters are gonna wanna discuss presumably. And, I guess the good news is not only you get to pay 220,000 in fiscal year 25, you get to keep doing it for the foreseeable future to avoid loans.
What fun.
And look at all the money we saved.
That's true. We do say so.
I just think this is important.
We are-
That's probably for the fire department. That's the one thing that sort of sticks out when you look at the percentage increase, the cash increase. I just think we should be prepared for that.
That's a but conversation.
So I would point out in this section, the fire department increase is 8.35%. If we were to spend the impact fee on that equipment purchase, say, if we were to spend $25,000 of that impact fee and reduce that line item from $35,000 to $10,000, You see what I'm saying? You reduce that line item to $10,000, it drops the fire department increase from 8% down to 2.5%. So, you know, it's a way to use, we have a lot of reserves and we're, you know, we have been talking about ways of, you know, reducing the amount of money that we have in the bank. That seems like a legitimate way that you could do it. And we don't have to make.
You know where I would use it for, and it definitely would go along with what the purpose of impact fees are, is when we put the addition on. That's when I would use the impact fee money, because that is talking to the expansion of the fire department, the growth of the town.
Doesn't help us this year, though.
Yeah.
It doesn't help us this year, but I'm just trying to think until we get a chance to look into what we can legally spend it on. I know an addition would be something we could legally spend it on.
That does make sense.
Okay.
Hey,
Other thoughts from anybody? Okay, we're ready to move on to the next item, which I believe is
highway?
highway and recreation and trails, yes.
We'll start with wreck and trails. Let me just find it. You think I have these sections
It's at the
memorized
end,
by
it's
now?
at the very end.
There you go. Somehow I don't actually have them memorized. So we made a few small changes. So we added a line for gardening and landscaping. Let me take it off this page, break preview. It's annoying. There we go. So we did add a line in here based on some feedback from the gardening committee that they would like about $1,000 in the FY25 budget to look at some additional landscaping. And then some other sort of mechanical changes that we made was when we started to look at the charitable appropriations and redistribute them throughout the budget. In this budget line, we ended up with, based on the conversation in the last meeting, Lake Iroquois Association, Richmond Community Band, Richmond Farmers Market, the Camel's Hump Little League, and Halloween on the Green. So this budget did increase a bit, but a lot of that was moving items from other parts of the budget.
Right, just a shift, okay. Any thoughts about the rec and trails aspect? Seeing no, Jeff, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I spent some time with this, so I do have questions. So I would point out that we do have a parks maintenance budget, $3,000 that, you know, it would seem to me that we could get some advice from the Recreation Committee on how to spend that $3,000. We also have another $3,000 line item for recreation equipment, you know, so that's a total of $6,000 that, I would look to the Recreation Department, Committee, to give us recommendations on. The gardening and landscaping confuses me. Didn't we hire a master gardener to do gardening, and wouldn't that be in this?
Oh.
I thought it was more than $1,000 to do that.
This is what the gardening committee itself has requested of their budget for just feeds, plants, fertilizer.
So
that kind of
where
thing.
would the master gardener?
Not
salary
under this
be?
line item, but
No, I think isn't it under, is there landscaping up in admin?
Seems like it might fit under this better, but I don't know. Maybe it's under highway.
There
I
it
didn't
is.
notice it.
line 49.
Yeah, so this is where we've been spending for like the flowers and the plants that have
Well,
gone into the
even-
town center.
Even that, I thought that we had, that we allocated more than that for the master gardener.
Oh, for
Salary
Sure.
wise,
salary wise, we've allocated for that, but this is the additional
For
expenses.
equipment, so,
Yeah,
so the salary fits into the highway department salary? line item?
no, I think did we put that into the admin salary? Yeah,
it's in admin.
because her work is specifically here at this building and not at parks in general.
And also some work is done inside the town center.
True.
That's true. Like that plant right there behind Dennis and Jerry.
So we
Your tax dollars at work.
do have a recreation salaries line item.
Yeah, and that's for work that, well, no, I think that's mostly for cleaning of the restrooms.
But we do have an item for paying the soccer officials, don't we?
No, so that actually would be all out of the soccer fund.
Okay, I knew,
And I don't think that there's a soccer, but whatever soccer expenses are,
okay, I knew there was,
and we're managing that money. That's not really town money.
okay,
So this recreation salary really, I think, just goes to Karen for her work in cleaning the restrooms during the summertime. Well, spring, summer, and fall these days.
You know, I mean, to my mind, it makes more sense here than in the admin budget, you know, but that's just me.
okay. Thoughts from others. David, what do you think? Ambivalent?
Yeah.
Lisa?
Wherever we can keep track of it is, I think, good enough, right? It's not.
I can kind of, yeah,
large that,
yeah.
You know, it could fit it. Things could fit in several places. We decide, and there it is.
Yeah, it's not been keeping me awake at night, but if I had to, I'd probably go with Jeff's suggestion.
I sort of like clustering like products or expenses with like expenses.
Yeah,
That's what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
yeah, because otherwise you're gonna go, is that, and it's gonna be very easy. It's not giant dollars, but it still would be relatively easy for somebody to go, wait, which is which?
So we want to move the landscaper gardener for this building to recreation and trails
You know,
for salaries.
my hope is after the renovation, this will become more like a park. It'll be much nicer.
I guess so.
Oh, the town park building.
Well, is the gardening committee doing stuff all over town or just at the town green?
Yeah, the trails, they're doing stuff all over town too, right?
I mean, I kind of think that's easy enough if we want to just move the salary that we're paying for Mary here to Rec and Trails.
You know, I mean, I'm not gonna press it. It's just, it made more sense to me.
In a perfect world. I
Yeah,
think
but
you're
if we're gonna do that, we're gonna have to split it like we do with Karen. Karen has a line up in admin and a line in recreation. So if
One, two.
everything Mary's doing is strictly at the town center.
And right, and with Karen, when she cleans the town center, it's paid for out of the admin budget, and when she cleans the restroom at the park, it's paid for out of the Rec and Trails
Right.
budget. That's sort
And
of
the restroom at the park is only for 6 months out of the year, whereas her admin salary is for all year.
Good night, gentlemen.
See you guys.
so, either way, we're paying for it.
It's the same money. It's just where
Where is this?
yeah, I don't, you know.
Okay, anything else relating to the Rec and Trails? Okay, so Lisa, go ahead.
Just a
Bottom
random
line.
question, it doesn't relate to necessarily anything specific that we're talking about, but
If we were at
Whatever-
the same guard,
I like seeing all
We
this
did
stuff
more.
here. This is our good work.
whatever is gonna happen to English Community Forest as far as spending money, is that? Where in the future, where's that going to come from?
so they've got their own reserve fund,
Okay,
which, as I could tell you without guessing.
that's okay.
So they've got a reserve fund for Andrews Community Forest, which should be on here. Yep, $29,500 right now.
Okay.
And they have also in the past applied for conservation funding
Mhm.
for certain projects. So, if it ends up being a real large bill, we might have to look for other sources of funding, but right now those two, reserve funds have sufficed.
The dialogue will take a while, so.
It very well could be.
I'm going to ask a question just tangentially related to this about line 25 there.
Hmm.
Sometime back, when we were discussing the town center plans, some member of the audience wanted to discuss the tree inventory for the town.
Excuse me?
When we were discussing the town center, you showed that lovely diagram showing the parking lot with trees. Some people in the audience wanted to discuss the overall town tree inventory. And I'm just kind of curious, we've got a special revenue fund for tree replacement. In practice, are we using that to plant new trees around town?
I don't think we've used anything out of this in a while.
Okay, it's not giant dollars, but it's something that the gardening committee could conceivably be asked to look into. Are there
Mhm.
places where, I mean, that'll buy you at Gardener's Supply, a couple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
What I would think next year, when it comes time that they're starting to do stuff down there, Jay, I would have the select board make a motion to use that $237,000 from the tree reserve.
$237,000.
$37.
You
Oh
freaking
my
forest.
God. Yeah, okay. If we're ready to move on from rec, you want to go to
Okay.
highway?
Let's go on down the highway.
So there's certainly a few things to discuss in highway. Maybe I'll just sort of touch on a few topics and we can circle back where we want to. We added a new line, and I'll just touch on it for a second. I'm sure there's gonna be more.
337, yep.
So the idea here was a transition from new sidewalks to new transportation infrastructure. We met with Chris Cole and Kathleen Jett from Transportation Planning and talked about how when we set up the sidewalk reserve, it was really for new sidewalks focused on Bridge Street and Jericho Road. The Jericho Road one, we did not get the grant, so that's not moving forward anytime soon. And on Bridge Street, we've planned to pay for that with grant and with ARPA funds. But so that sort of was our foreseeable sidewalk future that we were going to use new sidewalks for. However, there are a couple of other projects that are kind of coming down the pike that are the intersection where Bridge Street intersects with Huntington and Cochrane and Thompson Road. There's some proposed changes coming there, and there could also be some implementation on Cochrane Road shortly. So what we looked at this line for was sort of as we transition transportation projects to the actual final design and construction phase, and they don't have to be just sidewalks. Up in planning, there's a transportation planning line that we have, and that's more for it's not quite ready for construction, but we're looking into it. And then once we say we're going to construct it, then it would move to this infrastructure line.
Chris, you've taken your camera off mute. Do you want to talk about that?
Serious.
No, I think Josh has covered the landscape really well.
Okay.
And so what we would do essentially is, and Connie, I think, follow me up on this, but I think that we've created two lines to show the historical funding for sidewalks. And then we would show where the new transportation infrastructure line comes in this year. And then the board, if this is the route that we want to go, the board could then make a motion to essentially close the new sidewalks fund, transfer that money into the new transportation infrastructure fund, and then that money would proceed to be there along with anything new that's added.
I like that idea.
Chris, this is Bart, to expand on that, is it appropriate to think of the life of a project that succeeds sort of going from planning, scoping, preliminary engineering, contracting, construction, something like that?
Something like that, but the dividing line is between planning and there's different definitions between what the MPO calls scoping and what the agency calls scoping. The agency scoping is post-planning, but for the MPO, it's included in the planning, and that's fine. So everything that is planning or scoping would be in the operating transportation planning line. Anything after that, where we have submitted an RFP for design services, including up to and completion of construction, would come out of this line. And presumably we would have a grant to pay for the 80% share of the project. Pardon me while my hand gesture ripped my earbuds out. We anticipate getting grants for the other projects, but if we had a project such as the Jericho Road sidewalk project that we didn't get a grant for, and our feedback from the agency was we're likely not to get a grant for it given the low volumes of projected use, et cetera, that may be a project that at some point, if we're not successful getting other grants that we thought we were going to get, the town may want to pay for that project out of this line. But the goal is to get grants from VTrans, and this line would pay the 20% match.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's one change. Then we also talked about extra, we're adding fog lines. So we do have the center line paint and shoulder line, which is used to purchase paint for when the highway crew restripes like the parking lot here, parking stalls on Bridge Street, crosswalks, as well as the paved portion of West Whitehill and East Hill Road. We put center lines on those two roads out of this line. All other center lines in town are done by the state because those are federally funded or they're state funded class 2 roads. So the other two roads that aren't paved, that aren't class 2, we put the center lines on with that $7,000. We also looked into, I created a sheet which I'll share here as far as what it would cost to do center line on other parts of the road. So Pete reached out, got a quote. Essentially, he's quoting about 10 miles here of white line, and this is about 4 miles or so of 4-inch yellow line. So they gave us a price of 15 cents per foot. So that made a spreadsheet to look at. If you're doing a mile of 2 fog lines, it costs about, the quote is $15,084. And then I also did a higher estimate in case we said, well, what if it actually costs 20 cents? So to do a mile, let's figure it's about $15.84. So if we're looking at roads that we wanted to consider adding fog lines to, add those roads here, the road mileage, the cost on the conservative estimate of 15 cents, and then, you know, assuming that, you know, if we ordered less paint or the price went up, it could go up as high as 20 cents. So we've got ranges here from $7,500 for all of Huntington Road to $1,200 for Governor Beck.
Do you have a sum? I'm sorry.
I don't have a sum on that. I'm sorry. I do.
That is hard.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that we were going to try to do all of them. So I should have put a total on
The
there.
two priorities for me would be Heinsberg Road and Cochrane Road, with Huntington Road if we're going to add a third. But Jericho Road, I don't drive on Governor Peck Road enough to know how bad the speeds are, but I'm sure they're bad. Any thoughts from the rest of the board? I mean, do we want to try to do all of these, or we want to split and do half of them? We're gonna have to keep doing this year over year, but how often, how many years can we go with? I'm babbling because I'm tired. Do we have to renew these each year?
Yeah,
I think it has to be striped pretty much at least once a year.
Right.
Well,
the center lines go away every year.
they
Right.
do.
Right. So if we do this and we want to actually treat this as a long-term solution to speeds, we would have to see this as an ongoing expense.
Yes.
So what do people think? Jeff?
Well, I kind of hate to do all of the roads in one shot. I mean, A, it's expensive.
It is.
And B, we don't necessarily know if we like it or not, you know? I like the roads that Jay identified, Heinsberg and Cochrane Road, not just because I live in Heinsberg Road and really not self-interest. It's just that it seems like a good road to experiment on, and we have had a lot of complaints about speeding.
I think that's the opposite thing right there. It shows action on our part, and Cochrane and Heinsberg really.
Those are easily the worst.
They would be the two. I don't know whether the quote or the conservative estimate is the right one to go with, but I can give you total numbers because I put it in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, I can do that too right now. I just pulled up my
It's
Excel
like
sheet.
$12,000 for the 30 cents a mile for those two roads, and it's $16,000 for the 40 cents.
Which roads are we looking at?
It's like 12,000.
No, which roads? I'm just gonna do
Heinsberg
it here.
Heinsberg and Cochrane
Heinsberg
Road.
and Cochrane.
Not Huntington.
Yeah, what do people think? If we had to do a third, I would add Huntington just to be continuous, so we don't have striped, no striped, striped.
Yeah.
And people do drive crazy on Huntington.
Yeah.
Those would be the three I would focus on at this time. I know there are going to be people listening to this who go, what about East Hill Road? Because nearly every time that I could vetch about Cochrane, I get emails saying, what about East Hill Road? But I think these would be the priorities just in terms of volume of traffic.
People should almost have to drive slow enough in East Hill.
You would think, right? I know, it's
So there you go. So this is Heinsberg and Cochrane, which is making sure I got that right.
Get the most bang out of our buck.
And that adds Huntington in there.
I'd like to see these done in May or June. I can't stand it when the state repaints their lines in October.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
Pete usually tries to get on as early as he can. Some of it is based on availability of the contractor. Like you'll see as soon as the snow melts and the streets are clean, he'll do the parking. Like he does that himself, he can control it, but I agree. I think he would do.
Yeah, I'd say if we can't get it done by June 15th, we put it off a year.
As long as there's full adequate at that point.
Well, so how to proceed? Is it reasonable to put at least for now, a plug number for all three? It's round number $20,000.
$20,000 would be fine.
And anticipate if it lasts a year, you'd be doing $20,000 a year just for them.
And what I would anticipate is once we do that, the people who live on the other roads are gonna say, oh, this looks good, I wanna do that.
But you know, what? Another way to look at it is, we've got what, 4,400 residents in Richmond, give or take. Do the math, that's like $6 per person
For these.
for these. No, I'm just saying in terms of, we know that these roads are not safe for pedestrians and for cyclists and for,
Absolutely.
I think $6 per person for something that could have
Life-saving.
really life-saving, Chris.
I am echoing your statement, Jay, on East Hill Road. For the Transportation Committee does get comments from East Hill residents when we're working on other projects regarding pedestrian or bicycle safety that they're not included. And so it's a short amount of road mileage in the scheme of things of what you're looking at. And it is a major traveling corridor to Williston, similarly to Heinsberg and Huntington roads. And it may not be classified as a major arterial between those communities, but it's heavily used. And people do drive excessively fast in the Richmond portion of that on East Hill Road. So just to put in a word for our East Hill neighbors.
If you were to do a fourth.
Yeah.
What if,
The difference with East Hill Road is there's no center line.
Then just do fog lines. Fog lines are critical for knowing when you're leaving the pavement.
There is a center line in still.
Something so.
well, we can get on Google Maps and check.
There, I mean, that's what,
Road center line? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I drive it all the time.
so do I.
Okay.
If there was one, it hasn't been there
And
for a while.
What would people think about, I know the slippery slope of doing all these, but to Chris's point, I hear from people in East Hill Road
Yeah, we
more than, I think we could include that one.
I don't know where that is.
If there's no center line
You
now.
see
it's
all the
just
other roads
one.
around it, not.
Well, yeah, if you visualize the contiguous roads, Huntington, Heinsberg, Cochrane, East Hill feeding into that.
On the Richmond side?
Yeah,
I would love to see all these done, but it gets to be a pretty significant expense after a while.
Well, a few years ago, the state did Kenyon Road.
They did
Did they stripe the dirt portion?
for like a quarter mile. at the
Only adds.
Northern end of it.
It's not.
Yeah, and then they went, oh, this is dirt, and they stopped.
That's pretty. The scary thing is it lasted a couple of weeks.
East Hill Road, no center.
No, no, I think there's a memory of it,
It's like a
so I think it hasn't been done. You can see.
Oh, yes, actually, you're.
Yeah, I think it's just not been done maybe recently.
Can I share for a second? Just
Yeah,
get this
sure.
covered.
I'll stop sharing.
Because I walk up there, I did not recall seeing one.
I will say that, that I corresponded with Kara, I think, on it, and she wanted to do all of them.
Mhm.
You know, and when, there's a specific point that she had that I agreed with her on, that the fog lines, I think, will be really helpful. I think we're gonna need to do it. I don't recall it.
I like fog lines for two reasons.
Oh, what?
By the way, this is East Hill Road.
No.
It might be,
It's faded
Jeff, it might be
spots.
worn to the point right now where you can't, I don't know if Pete's
Yeah, as
got
you start hitting
do it
back
this
this
year with
way,
everything else
notice-
going on.
you have to do a very short distance and it's almost and
Yeah, it's been worn down quite a bit.
but the
Although who
reason,
knows how
yeah,
current
the
this
reason
is.
I like fog lines is twofold. One, it has demonstrable effects on speed.
Yeah.
And two, it has visible benefits for pedestrians and cyclists because it gives them an area that if they're in it, the drivers are less likely to say, get the hell off the road.
I think so.
It doesn't mean that they're automatically safe, but it helps a little bit, I think.
And according to the consultant that spoke recently, I mean, when you skinny the road up a little bit with those, it tends to reduce speeds.
Mhm.
Just inherently.
I would recommend, at least for the moment, that we put all four in and then
Yeah.
sort of highlight it. I predict at the end, we're gonna come back and look for places to reduce expenditures. I
Yeah.
don't know if this is a candidate or not, but it's an up. And so I think I would recommend we put on in all four at the moment and come back to our challenge in meeting budget
Well, yeah,
targets
good point.
overall
I mean,
later.
it'll be harder later to put anyone.
Chris, and you know, I know you have your finger on the pulse of available grants for traffic safety. Is this
You're
something
also,
that,
well, I mean, you're also starting at a deficit because I don't know what your regular cycle has been in the painting, but you know, having center lines and having fog striping are the white lines on the side of the road are really important safety measures to help people know where they should be. And you may want to divvy this up once you've caught up and gotten to a regular cycle as to we're going to do half the mileage one year, half the mileage another year. But I think you're starting at almost a ground zero for some of them. And so you really ought to, most of this stuff is done by inspection and how much of the paint is there and where do you need to go. And you may have some heavy use roads where those snow plows just scrape those lines off the road each winter and you've got nothing left. And so it really takes your highway crew to drive around, determine which of the roads that are the highest priority because they have no lines, and then, you know, have a certain mileage amount you budget for each year and manage it that way.
one other thing this is of course the budget that kicks in on July 1. And to David's point, you don't want to be doing this at the beginning of October. This is not a vote on what money we spend in May of 2024. So we would have to ask ourselves as select board, do we want to overspend the 2023-2024 budget to go ahead and start this cycle this May?
It's either that or put it off.
Right. I would, the sooner we can get this in, the better from my point of view. We've got reserve funds, but of course, money spent out of the reserve the unassigned dollars now, or the restricted dollars, is money we cannot then use to lower taxes.
Right. And just my 2 cents, I think you're on the right track of wanting to do it earlier in the season because a lot of these lines get scraped off fairly quickly. So if you want to get the value from the investment, it's in the dry summer months and getting them on the road as soon as possible.
So this is not a decision we have to make tonight, but what do people think about trying to get this cycle started?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, my thought is if we put it in the budget, we can revisit later if it stays there. We can revisit it later, like do we front load it in some fashion in this year? Sort of pre-spending next year.
So that's in addition to the 7,000 that we already have, right?
Correct, yeah, so
I think the 30 cents of what,
the 20 cents
I think that's good enough for me, you know.
for the
I mean, we
higher
have a
estimate.
quote, you know, I mean, we have a quote.
The 15 cents, 30 cents per square foot on either side. So you want to stick with that. And then are we going to do 2, 3, or 4 roads?
4.
All 4.
Try 4 for right
So
now.
we'll go to like 28,400.
Yeah.
This number plus 7.
That's the best price we can get. I mean, it just seems like once a striping outfitter, brings machinery out and so forth, and they just drive and do it, it'd be cheaper than if they do it, a couple hours and get back the next day. And I don't know. I just wonder if there's a scale point that we don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
The state got rid of all of their equipment for painting because they found it was cheaper to hire contractors over the long term of owning the equipment and paying for the staff.
yeah, I think if we budget at 15 cents, if there's less, then we can also do an extra road potentially. And I know there was some conversation in the managers meeting a few months ago about buying equipment and sharing it. I don't know if where that ever ended up, but I could double check with that. And if there's a shared municipal equipment, maybe we can get it for even less. But to Chris's point, 15 cents a foot seems fairly hard to beat.
Connie.
This is definitely a conversation that has to be held with Pete because the when depends on when he can get it done. We're not their only customer. Just like I know with some towns that mow the sides of the roads, some towns that do the painting, the people that do this have to line up their schedules. So I don't know if we can get them here sooner.
Well,
Okay, so let's talk to this on that.
Yeah.
Look, let's know what he says. Okay. on a related subject, the traffic calming line item,
Yes.
we've increased
Speed
that.
table.
Well, yeah,
Fog lines.
but you'll notice that the actual fiscal year 2023 was 2605. We're budgeting $10,000.
Yeah.
So that is besides striping. That would be things like
Right.
speed tables, giant pits, and Jeff was talking about speed dips recently. So when I say giant dips in the roads,
Curious, it seems, I thought, I think, I thought that Pete shouldn't replace the culvert on Cochrane Road.
we will be getting back, hopefully sooner rather than later, the results of the study from CCRPC on what to do about the 225-mile-an-hour section. And they may come back and say, what would work best here is like a giant swinging pendulum that will knock cars off the road. I don't know what they're going to say.
Yeah, that would be good.
But I think we need to be, even though I want to jump the gun and start putting in measures now, I mean, we asked CCRPC for advice. We're going to have to wait on it. But when they come back, we don't know what their suggestions really going to cost.
And sell the scrap money from all those exhaust systems.
And the timing is difficult, so we want a placeholder where we can actually respond and react to recommendations, right?
But at a bare minimum, well, this is another thing. This is again, the July 1 budget. And the people who live on Wheeler Lane and down between Jonesville Bridge and Duncan's house, they don't want to wait until July to get speed tables in.
But we still have 10,000 in the 24 budget. I'd have to look to see where we're at, but I don't think we've spent all of that.
Okay, so
If very much.
we need a plan to make sure that when he thinks it's appropriate to bolt those things down, that we have them.
Mhm. Chat, I just saw.
For striping and so forth. I think that started the up far end of Cochrane Road, the east end of Cochrane. It's gonna get busy.
Food.
Okay.
Keith, you've taken yourself off dark. Did you have something you wanted to share here? Oh, you just felt like turning your camera on. Okay.
I'm in anticipation of my budget lines, that's all.
Jeff,
So I think I may have found a little bit of money anyways. The streetlights, one of my favorite topics is streetlights. I found that Green Mountain Power was charging us incorrectly for streetlights back several years ago. We haven't changed that line item since we came up with that. So it's you see where it is, streetlight,
Yeah, right here, I got you.
$19,000, that right there, that's it. So that's similar to what we were being charged before. We're down now to more like 14 or 15,000 is what our
actual.
yeah, what our actual is.
We just paid to straight still.
So there are 3 different streetlight accounts. There's Church Street. We have 87 streetlights throughout town, and then we have one that's on Vermont Electric Co-op service. I think it's on Hillview. I'm not quite sure why, but all told, those add up to about 15,000.
So are you suggesting we revise this 19 to 15?
Yeah. So, and then do East Hill Road. I don't know, just, it's a little bit of money.
Every little bit helps.
I feel like 15's a little low.
Yeah.
I mean, part of that 14,198 was because we got a refund.
Oh,
No. I went over last year's electric bills, and that's about what it is. It's about $12,000 or $13,000 a year.
Right, but I just looked at the last 3 bills we got today, and if I times them out by 12 months, I came up with almost 16,000. And we've got to remember, we're talking about forecasting to fiscal year 25, so I think Pete was anticipating rate increases by that time.
Might do 16, but I looked at 12 months worth of bills for Green Mountain Power, and I came up with about 15.
Do we pay for power when the lights are on?
we paid.
No, we don't pay for power. We pay per pole,
Right.
So it's per pole, no matter how,
no matter what.
Yeah,
like what the season is,
Right.
how often it's on.
Right.
yeah.
Because they don't have a meter on every pole.
Right.
We buy the light, not the power.
Right.
So what do you want to do? 15, 16? What's the consensus?
Were you ever a car salesman?
No, but I was an auctioneer. I slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I was not an auctioneer. And he's like, really? That's great. Let's talk.
Nothing surprises me anymore.
No, I was a Snow Report TV show host
16
for a while. That's true.
Right.
I'll tell you more about that later. You want to do where, Jeff? 16?
16.
Okay. Going once, going
You wouldn't
twice.
know to look at Jeff that he used to work at a gator ranch in Florida either.
Connie, you okay with 16?
Oh,
Yep, if we come in over, then we know to do different in fiscal year 26.
The only other point that I would make, this is not for this year, but there was a really good article in Digger about the Hyde Park road foreman who's experimenting with brine, spraying brine.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It was really interesting article.
Yeah, I've seen across the
and,
country a lot. Yeah.
It's liquid salt as opposed to hard salt. And the value of it is that when it's really cold out, you throw the salt down, it bounces off the side of the road.
Hmm.
And when you spray it on, it stays where you spray. And they were able to reduce their quite a bit. But I'm not suggesting that we do that this year. This is something, might be worth researching, and see if any other towns in the county are remotely interested.
So maybe that's an item to contemplate post-budget?
Yeah.
What is that?
But yeah, I've seen in my traffic working days, remember, I had the guy who read the MUTCD. But Brian has been something that a lot of Minnesota has seemed to do a lot with it.
And I think, again, I think it was CCRPC is holding an informational meeting on it, maybe as early as tomorrow. I forwarded it to Pete. I don't know if we'll have time to go, but regardless, there's been some more movement on Brian. I hadn't heard about the Hyde Park issue, but that makes sense now that they're doing this informational meeting. So I think we'll have more information in the next couple of months.
Yeah. If you're really bored and you Google Minnesota, use of brine on roads, there you'll easily find you will easily find data about how it's worked out for Minnesota. It looks very promising. If Minnesota, it'll work here.
Which is flat, at least southern Minnesota.
Well, but not the whole state.
Yeah.
That's
true.
All right.
Yeah, it is worth a shot. I mean, the worst that can happen is it doesn't work, we go back to salt, but
Instead, so.
Okay. Keith does have his hand up now.
Keith?
Yeah, just real quick, Lake George and that whole region there has been using brine for a few years now. So NIDOT has been instituting that for quite a while. It's a little bit closer than Minnesota at this point. They also are pretty much the forerunners on roads, road salt and all that because of Lake George. So I just wanted to inform you all of that. So.
Okay. Those roads are not flat.
No, definitely.
Are we close to done here? Maybe go to the bottom. What does it look like? The bottom line here on.
Yeah.
So we're less than 5%. The moment.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct where we are? Because it looked scarier earlier.
6.01.
It was scary.
Well, 6.01 and then
Here's the bottom line.
4.56 is that,
6.01 is just the highway.
yeah.
Oh,
But that's not the actual increase. If you look on the revenue side, I bet we're above 12 at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the tax rate increase, definitely higher. But that's basically showing the difference between 25 budget and 24 budget. As far as expenses.
Yes, I appreciate the point. Yeah.
So
Okay.
planning and zoning.
Planning and zoning.
Thank you for your patience, Keith.
No problem.
All right, so. I'll just go over a couple of the changes that we have here. So as we talked about at the previous meeting regarding remote work, a need for cell phones, planning and zoning, both of those staff members do work remotely more than others. So put in money for cell phones, $500 per phone. And the good thing about the cell phones is we get the phones for free. We just pay for the service. So there's a municipal rate on the phone, so we don't have to pay for them. We changed dues under CCRPC. We just added CCRPC dues because that's all CCRPC, just to be a little bit more specific so people know what we're doing there. We also put in the actual figure for dues. We've been working on an estimate. We do have the final number for FY25 from CCRPC. And in conjunction with the talk of increasing the line for new infrastructure, we also reduced the transportation planning line. We were at $15,000 the last meeting, but we dropped down to 10. Currently, we don't have anything in the hopper for UPWP, which is the primary use out of transportation planning for FY25. But Keith wanted to keep some money in there because inevitably there will be some other projects that will come up sort of in the budget year that we want to make sure we have some money for.
So I'm pretty sure I say this every time we use an acronym, but for people listening at home, can we please define UPWP?
Yes, that's the Unified Planning Work Program through the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. And it's extremely helpful in some of these longer range planning studies. So for instance, the pinch point study was a study that went through that. The studies on Cochrane Road are going through that program. And it's also a program where the town only pays 20% of the cost and the rest of that is picked up by Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission.
And coincidentally, you're presenting on this then, right?
Presenting?
Going to the meeting in a month.
So there's a CCRPC committee and it's mostly staff work, CCRPC staff work, but as vice chair, I chair now this committee, which then scores the different elements. The take home for me is for many years, Richmond put nothing in the queue.
Oh,
And
cool.
if you don't put anything in the queue,
You're not
don't
getting
get
anything out of
money
it.
at the other end.
Right.
And you have to think ahead. I mean, Chris Cole has been articulate about this
Yeah.
in the past, like, if you want something done, you're gonna have to start it now and 2 or 3 years, it'll come to fruition. And we now are actually showing up and getting money, and kudos to our town staff for doing that, but it's where the federal money sits and you must be present to win.
Mhm. Yeah, I think for the last at least 3 to 5 years, we've had at least one project every year.
Yeah, it's not just staff, the transportation committee
Absolutely.
has been just
Yes.
remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are they're definitely a special committee, that's for sure.
Chris isn't here to hear about it because he's getting food.
I'd
I'll
like
teach him.
to, do kudos for you for having an internship stipend.
Yep.
You know, you'll have to think about whether or not you actually, you get $2,000 worth of work out of an intern, or it doesn't cost you, your time to do it, but it's a really, it's a good thing to do if you can do it.
In 6,000 supervision.
Yeah, so I am in discussion with, of all people, Reddy on this, because he is teaching a class at UVM. And we're sort of formulating a plan, and it will be transportation focused, most likely.
Well, tell him we said hi.
Oh,
I shall. Absolutely.
One thing that I would point out, it might be not just for planning and zoning, it might be more of a policy, but it showed up in planning and zoning and the warrants, was travel expenses.
Mhm.
You might want to go to per diem as opposed to, just, give us your receipts.
Mhm.
That would seem to make sense to me. I mean, that's what the state does, isn't it? Pretty much. That's what I recall.
Mhm.
Well, I think that would be a policy change, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to do.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, overall, I mean, my take on the budget, it's fine. I had one question today that I got answered on the legal line, because we've already maxed out our reserve on the legal line for this year. So I want to make sure that we have enough for next year, especially with a couple projects that seem to appear to be litigious, to say the least. We do have a lot of amendments coming down the pike also, and I like to have Dave Rue take a look at those and his staff take a look at those too and vet them. So that's why that's kicked up.
No, we don't have any. Okay. So that's anything else about planning and zoning? Anybody have any questions about? Okay, Keith, did you have anything else? What closing thoughts?
Yep, it's fantastic. Looks good.
Thank you.
Okay, then the next item. Do we have Anthony or anybody like that here?
I didn't see any.
Police.
Was he expecting to be here?
I invited.
I don't know if he needs him
I
to be.
did. I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard from him. I invited all department heads.
Okay, well, the next item is
It
police,
is police.
and I'll continue to just ask you to summarize as you've been doing.
Sure. So for police department, let me pull up the other thing that we have here as well. Okay. Okay, so we'll start, man, that's gonna be too small.
Here we're coming back to avoid having massive amounts of police salary savings every year, trying to get a better prediction.
Yeah, so I'll start at the budget, which is here, so in the one, everything now. Sorry, I've got too many windows open now. Is this, no, that's the wrong one. Okay. There we go. So in the budget that we've just been looking at, we've kept things mostly flatlined to 2024. The only exception being down here where we made some of these changes based on appropriations. So Williston Community Justice Center, actually though, community outreach and unit for special investigation, both previously. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just talk about these in order. So Wilson Community Justice Center, we added in based on the conversation that we had, the letter from Williston asking for some funding. The board didn't really settle on where we wanted to go, but I put in as a placeholder the higher end of that request.
Right, because we've been getting it for free, basically.
Right, we know the fires.
Community outreach had been funded out of the police line for the last number of years. We kept historicals there, but we moved the current line to contracted services, I think social services, because we realized that it is policing, but it can be used by the town residents as a whole. So it's a benefit more than policing. And we added the unit for special investigations, which had been in the charitable appropriations. We added that to the police budget. So there are some modest changes from the flat line, but that's what's in the budget here. And then we also provided the look at different options, and here we are. So we kept with option one, which is essentially what's in the budget right now, which is mostly flat to FY24. Then we looked at an option two, which is really a fully staffed department with one chief, two corporals, two officers, and one administrative assistant. We looked at an option three, which is two corporals, two officers, one administrative assistant, and a chief contracted with Heinsberg. And an option four, which is one corporal, two officers, and one admin with contracted policing from Heinsberg and a contracted police chief. So essentially fully staffed with a chief, fully staffed with a contracted chief, partially staffed with a contracted chief, and contracted some contracted services from Heinsberg. We included some backup here because there are some questions at the last meeting as far as how did we arrive at the salary numbers. So we included salary and benefit backup, as well as salary projections, and just to look at historical pay grids from FY22 through projections for FY25, just so you can see where things have moved, especially as we agreed back in the spring to match the Williston wages. It was a decent jump. Look at the bottom line. Last year we were at $710,000. If we mostly flatlined with those changes we talked about as far as the appropriations, we'd be at 725,000. If we looked at a projection for wages, it went fully staffed with in-house chief for 836,000. Fully staffed with a contracted chief, we're at 752,000. And partially staffed with contracted chief and some contracted services, we're at 747,000.
So just to jump in, options 3 and 4.
Yep.
I think option 3 is quite possible this year, but it's kind of potato between 3 and 4 because you notice that either way, we're at $750,000.
Yeah.
The only observation I'd make is we have a collective bargaining agreement, which does not talk about in perpetuity shift coverage with another town. I think it's predicated on the assumption that we will try to hire officers and fill positions. Whether we're successful or not and have to continue or can't hire and continue contracting for police services, I think that tips me into option 3 because a straight face, it says that's what we're trying to do is hire officers.
Yeah.
Right.
And forgive me for asking this, but what is the difference practically between a corporal and an officer?
A little bit more pay, a little more responsibility, a little more experience. What you're kind of doing there is the gentleman that we're looking at for corporal positions, looking at, not hire them, have 10 years experience in the field.
Okay.
More gold over here.
Jeff.
On the CJC thing, I had 2 issues with that. So, when Williston presented us with options, they presented us with an option for 22,000 and they presented us an option with 15. And it was based on, they are projecting that they're going to be spending, $72,000 out of their general fund. And they're going to be contributing $28,000 worth of in-kind services. And so they gave us, well, you could look at it as the 72,000, or you can look at it as the 100,000. The 22,000 is based on our share of 3 towns that have police departments that CJC services. Okay, so I have 2 issues with that. I prefer the 15,000 one, not just because it's cheaper, but I think, they gave us that option. This is the first year that we're doing this, and it's something that we're going to have to work into. This will become a permanent line item in our budget going forward. And I think $15,000 makes sense to me. My second issue is that, what Bolton, Huntington, and St. George receive CJ services and they pay nothing. So what I would like to do is that I do think that we ought to be paying our fair share. I think 15,000 is enough for this year, and I think we ought to be in discussions with those other 3 towns to be contributing their fair share.
Yeah, Bart?
I agree with the caveat of the last part. I don't think it is our role to advocate for CJC with those other towns. But exactly on the same compass heading, what I'd like to say is to CJC, what is your fee structure that includes all the towns that you serve? And then in that, what is our fair share? And it would appear to me that our fair share, like if it was per capita,
Yeah.
is
what this is based on.
going to be more like 15, right?
Yeah.
So that, and that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But if you throw in, here's my concern, it's missing the other town.
It is.
Like if they serve Jericho, well, where's the funding for Jericho?
They don't do Jericho, but they do Bolton, Huntington, and St. George. I don't know why they don't do Jericho.
And it's really time for St. George
another
to step
question.
up.
I mean, I have a set of questions which are, it seems to me a somewhat arbitrary list of communities. And if they serve other towns, like I would ask, why wouldn't they serve Jericho and solicit funding from Jericho?
So I think
There might be a reason.
I think that's a good discussion for, after budget season.
Yeah.
As we work in with CJC.
Yeah.
Because only they know how much service those other places are getting.
Yeah, and just to be just to
they
make
use it.
sure that we're clear, so this proposal came from the town manager in Wilson, not the CJC, but I think what
Oh.
you're saying is we want to ask the CJC for more information
Yeah.
and then have a better conversation, but
Jericho may be getting covered by the Essex CJC.
They
Well,
might-
right, so I don't know who's covered, who isn't,
Right.
where.
Yeah, they cover, Essex covers Essex, Colchester, Milton, Jericho, Underhill, and Westford. There's your answer. That's why Bolton, Huntington, and St. George.
it'd also be interesting to see how is the Essex CJC funded across all those towns?
Yeah.
Where is it?
There might be a model.
And there,
could be
you know,
something.
there's, the reason this is coming up is because the Department of Corrections is reducing their contribution to to CJC, so it's bubbled up more in Williston. One other thing about this is that I'm not sure that it should be under the police budget. So CJC works closely with the police department, but not exclusively with the police department. And frankly, I would rather see Josh be their boss than our police chief. Because they might not agree with the police chief, or whoever he may be, right? You know, so I would like CJC to be able to speak freely about how they're working with the police department, no matter who they are, you know, what police department. And if they're beholden to the police chief for their appropriation, they might have a harder time speaking freely. So, community outreach is under a separate contracted services section. I would suggest that the CJC be in that same category. It's not a change in money, it's just a change in where it is. And
Okay,
That's interesting.
How do you feel about that, Josh?
fine by me.
Okay.
I don't have a strong feeling either.
I mean, I think it's like, I think your point is it's similar to community outreach where it has a strong police component, but there's other services.
it's not
as well.
exclusive, you know?
Yeah.
And, the population should feel free to go to them for other things.
Mhm.
And, you know, I can envision a time when they might have a problem with our police department and, you know, I just don't want to put that barrier in front of them.
It strikes me that is consistent with the idea that you should solicit funding from communities you serve that don't have a police department. Because you put it in the police department budget that doesn't exist, maybe the funding doesn't exist.
Right.
Makes sense. And maybe we go, I'm just looking at the delineation here, maybe we put them under donation, social services, because we don't actually have a contract just yet
Yeah.
with them. Whereas with community outreach, we do have a contract where we actually have a funding that we're responsible for if we want to be part of it.
Well, so, you know, when we get to that, I have an opinion about, you know, these three categories.
Okay, so we'll put a pin on that until we get down there, but maybe move it out of police for now and maybe change it to 15,000.
I would prefer the 15,000 number or the 15,840 number.
Did you want to do 15,840? It was the number, what was it? It was at,
Yeah, so it's 15,840.
Right.
And is that strictly for services actually rendered? It's not a bill, it's not a standing amount, correct? I mean, it's not like we have a subscription. It's for actual.
Well, we've been using them without paying. It's
Well,
basically,
yeah, but then-
we're basically
Make up
chipping
for
into,
it
if we give them 15,840, we can not use them. We can use them 300 times a year, or we can use somewhere in between. It's not, there's not a transactional because we've used them 16.5 times. So this is the number.
Okay. So it's just
This is the kind of, yeah.
so
I kinda hope
so-
we don't want to-
So, yeah.
if we circle back here,
I'd rather
if
use them than
we make
use.
that zero.
Before you
Oh.
move it, can I say something?
Yes,
Oh,
please.
sorry, I didn't see you.
I'm thinking because it's tied to police, it should remain in the police budget. That does not dictate who handles it. So if they want to have discussions, they can still have discussions with Josh, but it's related to police services, isn't it?
You know, I think it's a good point. I think it makes more organizational sense budget wise where it is. But
Mhm.
if we think that it should always flow through Josh, we just simply need to state that. Or heck, we could use Andy Squire, you know? I'd be
I
able to
frankly
state
don't have a
this.
strong opinion, you know, that an Venn diagram, it sort of overlaps things, so.
I know that Heinsberg does not include it in their police budget.
I don't think they've included it at all yet. They're like us. I don't know where they're planning on putting it though. I mean,
They
I
also
would-
do Heinsberg also does a very different budget structure
Right. But it's
altogether.
a new request of them as well for this year. So I haven't talked to Todd about where they're going to put it or even considering it. I don't have a strong opinion either way necessarily. I mean, I think management of it, Crystal Lee can come to me whatever she needs if she has a question, whether her budget is out of police or otherwise.
And we can always rearrange it next year.
Yeah, I mean, what's the pleasure of the?
See, that's exactly what I was going to say not to do, because we keep moving these lines from a department to appropriations, now out of appropriations back to departments, some to social services, some to contracted. And part of why, I mean, Josh had a really good point when we put the budget together. We put both versions there because we wanted to be able to see where was it and where is it. And as you keep going on each year and keep changing some of these lines, like QC is a perfect example. We've moved back and forth many times.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I would like to be really mindful and really think about what we're doing so it's easier for us to track in the future.
Yeah, I agree with Connie, but this is the first time that we're gonna locate it somewhere, for long, we should.
Yeah. I'd also like to note that if we can get the budget fully covered tonight, that'd be great. So we don't have to have a fourth meeting. So can we say, let's move it where leave it where it currently is in the budget and simply let it flow through Josh instead of Anthony? Is that going to work?
Basically, since you
Still
can
have
work with John.
something to
Yeah.
vote on.
I just think this is not something we want to spend forever talking about.
So if we reduced that to 15,840, going with option 3, because I saw a lot of heads nodding when Bard made the point about option 3.
Yeah.
That gets us to 746,837. And I could plug that into the budget that we have sort of live right now. And as we get to the revenue side, we would have that number. So, okay. 746.
Now, there were in the packet sheets documenting in more detail pay grids and insurance and VMers. But that's all factored into the number that we just went with. So does anybody have any questions about any of those background documents?
So right now, we only have one officer. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And we have one candidate whose background check is hopefully going to be
He's
completing very
doing it
soon.
on military leave. Do we pay his benefits?
No, not while he's on leave.
No, he doesn't get health benefits to the town anyway.
If he starts coming back and drawing shifts, then we'll.
Did he, or did he, you do the buyout?
Believe he's buyout, right, Connie?
So I don't know how much of this we can actually discuss because we're talking about healthcare and an employee. But we actually do pay some of his benefits while he's on leave. What we found out was the dental and eye insurance through their contract runs through their union. And this time the union made us back pay all the way to the beginning of his deployment. So we didn't pay it while that individual was deployed, but they made us pay it later.
It's smaller though.
And
than-
also to keep in mind is these versions, all these vacancies, I'm planning for 2-person health insurance plans. They could be families, they could be singles.
And also, we didn't include the per diem officers in the options, and that would be,
Assuming we can find it.
assuming we could find any, yeah. So
Right now, we have nobody. When I first got on the board, we had a couple that we could call on, but those are long gone.
all right. I think, what did we say? I thought I put a number into the memo. Connie, what was that? It was like 8,000. We wanted to add in the per diems.
Oh, I don't, yeah, I think it was about that. I mean, since we've had the per diems,
It was 25,000 if we wanted to add 3 per diem officers back into the budget, but right now, I'd be happy to have full-time officers before we start talking about per diem officers.
And even though I know it seems like progress is glacially slow, there is progress. And that's something that I think we probably might want to have an executive session at the next meeting to discuss progress with the union and various other law enforcement things, personnel things.
Makes sense.
Okay,
I did have a question on supplies. Supplies have been, I think, Anthony has been racing through our supply budget. In a good way.
Mhm.
You know, in the actual for 2023, you know, we spent $24,000 on supplies. Right, and those are, you know, not uniform, not office supplies, those are I'm assuming it's like guns and badges and vests and bullets and that kind of stuff.
So I'm trying to find the exact line, Jeff. Which one is?
Hello.
Below?
Polygraph testing and supplies. There it is. right
Police
there.
supplies,
There we go. Okay.
119.
Okay.
Yep.
So in 2023, we spent $24,000 on that. And that was just, you know, the actual is just last year, right? Or even, yeah, it's just last year. So is $5,000 this year enough? You know, I would look to Anthony to tell us whether that will be enough.
Mhm.
And B, I'd kind of like to know what happened to the $24,000 for this stuff.
That's 5 times the budget.
You know, that's a big overspend.
If he was buying bulletproof vests.
You know, it could have been radios maybe, or I don't know, you know,
Yeah.
cameras, maybe cameras. But
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, there was one year we bought tasers and cameras, I think. That might have been that. Oh, we can double check it to make sure. But I
that
think
would have been under Chief Herrick.
that was FY 23. So I think, Connie, you're shaking your head now.
I think it was Kyle. I think it was back
Yeah.
when Kyle, before he left.
And was that,
Tansky.
is that your recollection? Yeah, I think Kyle did do
The
How was that?
tasers.
Yeah, we did the tasers and didn't we do body cams do the same?
I thought the tasers were free.
There was a new contract. I thought we had to do. Maybe I'm misremembering. I thought there was a new contract with Axion for the tasers
Correct.
and for the ones, right? Am I remembering that right, Connie?
Yep.
You can double check it for sure. Don't take what I'm saying right now as gospel.
Well, Josh,
But I think
might not
that's
be a
where it came
budget
from.
question, you know, it might be, you know, I know that Anthony's working on an inventory. You know, you know, I'd like to understand what we have
Oh,
and
Yeah.
And from the past.
And I think
what we need.
we're gonna overspend that 5,000 again in
I
FY
would think so.
24, just
Mhm.
based on the security upgrades alone, as well as additional equipment. So
Josh, is there any language in the contract about those things coming with an officer that we're, renting essentially? Or?
in the contract with Heinsberg?
Yeah.
No.
We fully equipped, or do we have to?
They're coming fully, I mean, I don't think it's spelled
They're
out
coming fully
specifically, but they're coming fully equipped as an officer to respond. We don't have to supply them with equipment now.
So it's just for our hires.
Yeah, and what Anthony's doing right now is going through and saying, okay, you need new optics for all your guns. You need to upgrade the building for the security items.
Mhm.
So I'm basically saying yes, because we need all of these things. And we're gonna be overspending in FY 24. I don't know how much will be, I think he's gonna get us really well caught up. So I don't know if we're gonna be really overspending in 25.
Right. If we get caught up
Yeah.
in future years, we'll still have to spend, but it won't be as much.
Right, that's my hope right now, as we're looking at things.
Okay, anything else about police?
What's the bottom line?
Did you guys see that red? All right, sorry, I'm trying to make notes, trying to make notes to myself that make it.
48,837. Wait, I can't read that.
Okay, let me make.
Seven-
So
746, 8.
Yeah,
There we go.
So that's a 1.8% increase.
and that's, oh wait, let me, no, that's right, that reduces that, because we did reduce the 22, the 15,000 number.
Well, we're just plugging that number anyways.
I'm just plugging that number.
The
into enough-
746.
Nothing above it means anything, according.
These numbers.
None of that drives this number. That's all on the other sheet that we'll fill in once we finalize it. Yeah, that's all in here, which we did reduce it to 15,840, so 746,837. Yep.
No, I'm sorry, you misspelled unassigned on those two tabs down there, but I'm gonna overlook it.
Thanks.
Sorry, I can't help it. The,
Oh,
the English major in me just, you know,
no, I did.
That's spelled word under a mile away.
yeah, no, I just,
Oh, they're awful.
Math was always better for me. I'm gonna do it right now though, because if I don't,
I'll just be cringing every meeting, but
well, yeah, I don't want to, I mean, I'd rather fix an error than let it sit there. Okay.
okay, so moving on to, we have two major chunks of the agenda left, before we get to revenue. A general budget discussion, town administration and assessors, and I think we should continue to have town administration.
I agree.
Yeah.
Like the ringleaders.
So again, we didn't really change much here. To be consistent with what we did in planning and zoning. We took the phone line and broke out. I've had a cell phone since I started, the town manager has. I added the cell phone in for the assistant to the town manager because Duncan is literally popping all over the place. So I think having a cell phone for him to help out as he's trying to organize contractors would be helpful. So that's about the $500 increase. We reduced this by $500 to pull the manager's phone out of there. And then the only other real changes is at the bottom, we added in.
GBIC and MMC TV moving here from charity, because it's. We are a 501c3, but we're fulfilling an administrative function.
Right.
I say we because I'm chair of the board, president of the board, but. Any questions about why? I've had a couple of people ask me, why are we getting cell phones for everybody and their brother?
It was very helpful during the flood.
Yeah.
Like very, very helpful.
Great example. Yeah.
Are you using it also for two-factor authentication?
Yep, that's also a good point. Yep. People are trying to use it for two-factor.
I will say since whenever COVID, that's what I've been doing for state government work. I can't get to anything unless it texts me an access number. And
Yeah, hopefully you're backing up your TFA. I've got 12 different TFA programs on my phone. I live in fear of my phone getting run over by a bulldozer because not all of them will let me easily back up.
Right. One just quick comment on GBIC. There was a conversation, Regional Planning Commission about virtually every small town has no idea what that group is and what it does. And so there's some intersection between CCRPC and GBIC. And one of our recommendations when approving their own priority list, which is something CCRPC does, we suggested that GBIC do better outreach to their customers, as in the small towns, like not only what have you done for me lately, and why should I care about what you do?
They have nice parties once a year.
Well, and to that point, one thing that I know they have helped the town with was they were supportive of the NBRC grant that we obtained that helped with $150,000 should we ever figure out a way to get the other money to extend the water or the wastewater system out to the REAP property. So they wrote a letter of support for that, and I believe put it on their list as well. So that was helpful to Richmond.
And so what I learned is if you want NBRC money, you should be on the GBIC list.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
no, I've heard that they're very helpful for NBRC money particularly.
And they basically, they do a lot of lobbying on our behalf.
Like them already.
They do publicity for the whole, they do a lot of area marketing to tourists and stuff, which, you know, rising tide lifts all boats, will know.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Way back in the day in their origins, they got IBM to come to Vermont.
Yeah, right. So there you
That
go.
was like,
Because what's his name, Watson, wanted to ski.
That's folks.
I wish
All
they
right.
kept them.
Okay,
Good with admin?
agree with that, then I think.
So,
Okay, so our last,
Jeff, I think has a question,
Okay.
sorry.
on flags,
Oh, yeah.
why don't we use the Adam Mueller fund for flag?
So Adam Mueller Flag Fund is for flags that are on the telephone poles that line the street. And these are for flags, I believe, that are on the poles at Volunteers Green in the town center.
Okay,
different flags.
good answer.
Different flags, different funding. It took me a couple years to wrap my head around which flag comes from which fund, but Linda knows it like
We
that.
dispose of them properly.
Linda's got it.
okay,
All right.
charitable appropriations. As we've discussed on numerous occasions, we were putting everything under charitable donations, whether it really was a charity or not. And we were also revisiting the question of, are these legitimate government services that we're having fulfilled by exterior organizations? In other words, are we giving these people money because we like them or because they're actually fulfilling a purpose? And Jeff, you went through line by line through all of these, correct?
With Bart.
With Bard, yeah.
And these changes are based on where the board wanted to pencil them in from last time. But it's still fluid. So, but just to, I guess, to give the quick, so as Connie mentioned earlier, we kept this section here to show the historical budget and actuals. If we move them with there, then the budget lines here would get all skewed per department. So we kept the historical section here. We've already talked about a few of these that have ended up in police and admin and recreation and trails. But then we also created a couple of new sections called contracted social services. So special services transportation agency, we actually have a contract with to fulfill the statutory requirement to provide elderly and disabled transportation. Community outreach, we have an agreement with as well for mostly police services, but it provides other services to the town. Then we have donation social services. So these are social services that are in the town, do some work in the town, but it truly is a donation. We don't have a contract with Vermont Family Network or AgeWell. We don't have to fund them like we do SSTA and community outreach. And donations for health services, because Richmond Rescue isn't really a social service, it's a health service. We created that health service line. And again, we don't have a contract, but they provide a very valuable resource in town.
And Lund didn't ask for anything.
Lund did not ask for anything this year, but they had in the previous years, yes.
Okay.
That's why we've kept it in there, but $0
Okay.
amount.
Questions from the board?
So, I would still lobby to put the CJC under contracted social services. And I would, to me, again, this is maybe it's a semantic thing, but the UVM Home Health Hospice is much more like Richmond Rescue or contracted social services to me than it is a donation. And one of the ways I'm thinking about this is for donations is to have a total amount for donations that are truly donations, and then figure out where we land on that. How much do we want to put towards that? And then ask folks to ask us for it. And that's as much as we've got. Rather than it feels like it's just been an open-ended process. Anybody who comes in the door, we say yes or no. And if you say no, it means you don't like them, which is not really the case.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, Jeff. I mean, first of all, people can justify the money, try to justify it instead of us trying to justify it.
Yeah.
They know what they do more than we know. And yeah, if we run out of money before it's all been, asked for, that's the way it is.
So UVM Home Health and Hospice is a specific service that they actually provide people to come to, households in town. So it is somewhat different than, cots.
Well, so in theory, you're suggesting that looks more like Richmond Rescue because it's more health related.
It does.
And, some of this stuff is somewhat arbitrary, I think, but it is fair to call them, I think, a health services organization.
Yeah, I agree.
Those would be, professionals.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. No, I screwed something up there.
Control Z.
Yeah, getting back. Is there not a? Oh, that's what I did.
Yeah, it should be above that, right?
Yeah, I missed the.
You just got to do cut and insert cut.
Yeah, well, yeah, I could do that.
Total too, yeah.
I never use that function for whatever reason. I don't always trust it, although I should.
Let's bring out the best in people.
Scares me how fast the spreadsheet.
Or something, you bring something up.
Yeah.
If you were to take that out of the list there of donations under social services, it totals $21,760.
Yep.
Okay, so something on that order. it seems to me that that's something we could wrap our mind around every year. We want to do $20,000 or $25,000 worth of donations,
It's like line striping for roads.
and then if 30,000 comes in, a request, we decide, I'm sorry, we don't have that much.
Mhm.
Then it would act much more like, my own personal budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, no, it does.
And I think that's what we were working towards that, or don't you think?
Well, we were certainly contemplating it. What some other towns have done to address this is just instead of every single one goes into the funnel to say, this is our overall general budget. And sometimes have actually taken that budget and given it to another committee and said, distribute this X amount of dollars. But so I don't have a strong feeling about it. I like the organization here about contracts, grants, donations, social services. In my historic world, donation is a grant versus a contract, which is a fee for something. You do it, I pay you. Grant is I'm giving you money to keep doing the great work you do, which is essentially a donation. Different word.
I don't object to doing that.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Connie has her hand up.
Connie?
Oh,
So if these have to be put on the ballot to be voted on, does that mean we leave them all blank like we do the Conservation Commission?
Would think so.
Or
Well,
no, because we're picking a specified amount? I think we gotta leave them blank.
Good question. This is untraveled territory, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we might need to have a follow-up with our attorney, maybe Bard and Jeff and myself, to say, here's what we got to, what's the guidance? But I tend to agree with where Connie's going. If everything under donation social services goes on its own separate ballot, even at a specific amount, it comes out of the budget, and then that's added in or not, depending on the success of the ballot item.
Well, also, are we able to explain to people somehow before they're voting that this is in addition
Yeah,
to the budget being voted on?
we'd have to do that similar to how we do that with the conservation fund.
Right.
Yeah, it's again, more to continue to communicate, but if that's the statutorily correct way to do it.
Then we should do it.
That may help to explain why at least one other town has said it's $35,000. You as a committee go sort it out. I don't know to what degree that's really consistent with the statutory obligation, but it seems like that's what they were trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding as we dug into this more a couple months ago is that kind of every town doesn't follow statutory obligation. Because I remember talking to him, I said, well, every town kind of does it this way. He's like, yeah, I know, it might be a problem. So yeah, I think let's have a follow-up and then we can come back to determine, maybe hopefully as early as next Monday, to come back and say, here's what we learned, make a modification of the warning, and then figure out if these would be voted from the floor or Australian. I'm not really clear on that either. Good to find out.
If each one is a Australian ballot item, it's a lot of stuff to count.
Oh,
But-
Yeah.
Well, not only that, but people would just
Okay.
start leaving them all blank.
if
They
you,
would say, I don't care enough.
if you do it from the floor, then you're gonna, get somebody raising their hand that they want to add, my Aunt Martha's, special.
Yeah. Well, you'd have it.
program that-
Let's come back to this, another conversation. If this is what we want to do we do it all as one ballot item, up or down?
Mhm.
Do we do it individual ballot items? Do we do it from the floor? And there are pros and cons of each. The simplest would be if we can put them all together and vote them up or down, right?
That would be simpler.
If we're allowed to do that.
Exactly.
I think we gotta go ask permission,
Yeah.
figure it out and come back. So we can probably get that done this week. Hopefully George got some time for us.
Okay, one other minor change here.
Yeah.
Is under community outreach. I think we had discussed adding the name Howard Center Community Outreach.
Okay.
Identify
Oh, yeah.
what it was. That's what that.
We
meant.
did, you're right. We missed that. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Okay, so going back to our agenda, we are on item 9, IX,
This is the most confusing part of it for me.
revenue. We're ready to move on to that?
Yes, let me,
Yeah, it is.
there,
And I couldn't make sense of it.
okay. So you want a quick overview?
And then more if people would like it, sure.
Sure, so I think we added in the $3,000 here for technology public use room fees rather than having that go to the reserve fund. We also added in $5,000 to kind of offset the community well-being line on the other side of the budget. That's from the opioid settlement, which can, as we looked at the guidance, it can go to a large number of preventative items. And since community well-being has historically been used for preventative items, we figured we could use some of that money to offset that line item. And as discussed in the last meeting, we used to have this general offset from unassigned funds at 500,000, and we reduced that to 140 based on the last meeting. Where that then leaves us is, despite only a 5 or 6% expense increase, as Barb was looking at before, it's a 12.59% increase over prior year on the tax rate. Yeah, I mean, the challenge there is, as you look at spending, right, our spending is only going up by, well, only, but compared to 12, we're going up 5%. And it's really the offset. You know, if we kept this 140 at 500,000, which I know we can't do because of our current funding, but then that tax rate is not updating automatically, and that's maddening.
Okay, well, newsflash, having a $500,000 natural disaster hit your town, it hurts. Unfortunately, it hurts, yeah.
All right, I need to redo this formula. This sheet was doing this to me on Friday too, where the formula wasn't carrying over.
What I got out of this, Josh, is on the top line item where it says property tax revenue, that 2 million, the top line item where it says 2,273,000.
This one?
Yeah. Okay, that's the sum of all the numbers below it.
No, so that,
No.
yeah,
If you click on it, that's what it says.
no, the formula
No.
guy. No, so that's the sum. So what that should be is this, Jeff. It should be the sum, and this was like, there was something screwy going on with the formulas on Friday. I thought I corrected it, but it was,
It's a sum of all the non-tax revenue plus what we need for taxes to equal the total budget line
so
for
it
Fund
should be
10.
that. Please don't, okay, good. Minus,
Okay, so it is the sum of all of the numbers below it to the, just above the total
no, so
fund
No.
revenue.
hold on a second. Let me see if I can correct, if I can correct the formula, I can explain it a hell of a lot easier. Did I correct the formula correctly? 22 doesn't seem to be right. Expense minus the sum of everything.
Can you just drag it out, copy and paste?
No, because there was something, and I thought I corrected it for this version. There was something when I opened up your version of it, like the formulas went away.
Oh,
I fought with it on Friday and thought I had it all set. And now the version I'm looking at, the formulas went away. I don't understand why. Because now I'm doing the FY25 expense, which is
Minus
H.
this line, right?
H255, yep.
Okay.
So
And that should be-
2874, 394.
Like it's really screwing me up here. So that's
Everybody stop looking at Josh.
Not even thinking about it.
no.
So
there's
it's that minus the sum of line 4,
it's
H,
this.
H4 through,
Yeah, so
which
that
one?
should, now it should be right, but is it?
oops,
Looked like that.
Guys, I'm
Technical
sorry.
difficulties.
Please stand by.
First problem you had, so.
It should be H 255 minus the sum of H 4 through H 46 on this page, right?
Is it 46?
Yeah,
Whoop.
that's
You're going up and down too much.
no, I know. But that's the correct number. Is
Oh, I think you got an extra parentheses in there,
that what it is?
I think.
And
Oh, maybe not.
the first character is equals or minus. Yeah, I want to type a formula.
So it's expenses minus.
Oh, I think I needed maybe I need do I need a parentheses here? So it's those expenses minus, that might be what I need.
Yeah, you need to close the first logical statement. No.
Or maybe I need an extra parenthesis still here in the end.
And at the beginning.
Okay, no, I don't think it needs one at the beginning.
Well, look at last year's.
Oh wait, maybe it doesn't need this sum. Yeah, I could, no, last year, Connie, what I'm telling you is the formula is gone.
So, I mean, what, is in my spreadsheet, it's FY 25 expense. At, H 255.
Yeah,
And that's not a sum, it's just a one cell
okay. And then it's minus,
minus the sum of everything below there.
right, which should be all this, right?
So you take out both of those, both, you take out the, that's right, but you don't need the parentheses around the, FY 25. You see the parentheses up at the top? You don't need that parentheses
This one
there.
here?
Yeah, you don't need that. And you don't need it on the front end either after the equal sign. Try that.
Oh, because
This one here, so just
Yeah.
keep that.
You don't have, do you have a,
Jeff, do you want to come drive? Do you want to
I
come drive?
can't do spreadsheets after 5 p.m.
You want to let Jeff inform the directly?
Yeah,
Okay,
I
I got
mean,
mine. Josh, I got mine up.
well, but you have all the changes we've made.
Equal
Sure.
sign.
Okay,
expense,
tell me what
da.
equal sign.
that's the formula that I have.
And then the quote, then fiscal year 25,
25 expense, yeah, so it should be this,
then the
Over here.
quote,
Yeah, that is what it, yeah,
then
That.
H255 minus sum.
of all of these, right?
yeah, that's where I think it should be, but like, watch, when I
And
flip
then in
back,
parentheses,
it's like, it comes back, okay, maybe I need to take that off and just go with this. Still going to the revenue. I think for some reason it's not gonna work.
H4
and then
to
you-
H46, and then parentheses.
Okay,
There
maybe
you
it
go.
worked. But now that's, it would be a different number because we've made some changes. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Right.
now, finally, I don't know why that. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know why. I think there's something with the version of Excel that you had that you were using versus my version. But it's weird that I saved it on Friday and it was all there. No,
Oh, do
it's
we think
not.
it's
But
working?
anyway, yes, it's working now.
Okay.
So if I
So-
put the 500,000, let's just double check. Then that should change that 12 to,
13.
and that
Oh.
shouldn't be.
I'm guessing that that's not right.
You have a $13 million one down here that's not right, or
No,
$3
what do I
million,
have,
the
Jeff?
$3 million not correct.
Where's this? 3
That
million?
one's, because you have 500,000 for one.
No, but that's,
Should that 500,000 negative?
yeah. Could that be subtracted from the sum?
but that should
But-
subtract from up here.
Oh,
And why,
seems like it.
now what, we literally just put that formula in and now it's gone again.
Well,
So
That is curious.
yeah,
so the bottom line, it's the H255 total expense minus all the non-revenue expenses, which is 4 through whatever your bottom number is.
Yeah, what if
So-
we did this, just for the sake of this? We know what this number is, right? We know this is 2.8.
Yep.
I don't know why it's not.
2874,394 minus, now go to your revenue
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna put,
and just total them. Start with line 3 and go all the way down.
I don't know why this Excel sheet is not behaving
you
like
go.
it.
Oops, you lost a line when you did it.
No, I think I just gotta do this.
It's like from the turn of the century, yeah.
It's great when it works.
Yeah, well, it's very 2.8. Okay, so let's see if this will work. When I put 500,000 in here. Well, it looks better for the moment, but it's been got a poltergeist in it. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so now it's down
Okay.
3.3.
So if we had not had massive storm and flooding, we would have been able to continue using a lot of vacancy savings to keep the tax rate lower. People have gotten spoiled by having a big bucket of unassigned funds to keep the taxes down each year. The piper has got to be paid though when that all goes toward flood. So if somebody says, if somebody says to me, are you being spendthrift? Why is it going up so much? It's basically the flood ate up our reserves.
So
The other part of the story is when we get reimbursed for all that.
Then when Santa comes, yeah.
In the future, we'll-
This time next year, we could have a lot more unrestricted funds if we get paid back in the next year.
So.
Well, we
this is-
could, but we have to still follow our policy.
Yeah,
This is where I was going with why I think, does FEMA cover the cost of borrowing money? Because otherwise we can strand a whole bunch of our money off over there for years while it's like waits to get repaid.
Right.
And maybe that's a fact of life.
to get the 2023 amount back.
And so it could just be sitting out there like, sort of
In limbo.
in limbo. The other thing that I think people will call out, and perhaps we should scrutinize again, is what is the balance of the different reserve funds? Are we saving too much money?
Because it will be asked.
Yeah,
That's why I was trying to spend it.
But people will also say, now, are you doing what you can to get interest on those? And we are.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think with the reserve funds, the work we've done in the capital budget the last 2 years really has focused in on all of those, like the bigger ones at least, have a purpose. I mean, tennis, we may not know what to do with, but it's only a couple $100.
Yeah.
But fire, highway, police, we've got things we're spending on.
I just think that
But,
those
yeah.
connect, like that's so our money is going over there to sit, waiting for FEMA to pay us back. And we are trying to sort of keep this level with our capital plan. And that's a bunch of money going into reserves. And that is a choice to make. Right? It's a responsible choice.
Yeah, right, we can plan it, it's gonna be there, so. Yeah.
So another way to look at this 140 is, I mean, if we did have this with the additional projections, so we don't have this money yet, but I think it's fairly conservative. If we use that 386,064, that I will put that in right now. Hopefully my formulas have held.
You did save, right?
No, that's what messed the formula up.
Do a save as.
I'll try.
Do a save as.
Oh, it was saving absolute value.
Right now it's working. I'm not touching it. So if we do the 386, it's a 6.45% increase, which isn't 12, but it's not,
It's close to 5.
it's closer, yes.
But it's being optimistic that we'll get that this cycle.
It's being optimistic that we're going to get this $42,000 from the state, which everything on FEMA is closed out. That should come, I think, fairly shortly. It's being optimistic that we'll be about $136,000 over in interest. I think we'll be at least that, if not more. And vacancy savings in police at 100,000, even with overspending the budget supply line and with hiring officers. I think 100,000 is conservative. So I think these are reasonable numbers to make for assumptions in the next 6 months.
But it's also being optimistic. We're not going to have another FEMA event.
Well,
Well, I mean.
we can't predict that piece of it. I mean,
Plan on that, you know,
yeah,
so what happens if we were to say, buy down the bond for the town center renovations by using some of the reserve funds?
With the plan to replenish them.
You know, like the town center
No.
or the conservation reserve fund or whatever reserve funds, what would that do to this calculation?
for
You can't
this
do
year-
that.
Well,
Those
wait,
reserves and purposes have already been voted on. You can't use them for another purpose.
But
That's
I
the same
think-
thing, like say we didn't have the money to throw at the FEMA event this summer. The auditors have told us repeatedly, if you didn't have the money for that, you can use your cash flow. But by the end of the fiscal year, you need to be taking a loan to replace that because those reserves had
Yeah.
specified purposes.
But I think the board could make a decision that the town center fund, we could use whatever's in there to go towards the renovations. And there might be a portion of the conservation funds that could go towards preservation of this building. I mean,
Or.
that would be the argument, right? You would get it approved by
Yes.
the.
Do that, I'm
Right.
just, you know.
But if that were to happen, like, that wouldn't have any effect on this year's budget because we're not planning on a bond payment for this year's budget. But in FY 26, it would essentially lower the amount that we're gonna borrow, and then it would change the amount that we pay back.
Can I
Right.
pick up on a comment that Connie said? I think if we wanted to retain money for a possible future
FEMA.
emergency, we would want to put aside money and call it FEMA like emergency reserve fund, wouldn't
Could we
we?
call it a rainy day fund?
Whatever. you
No,
wanna
no,
call it.
no, no, we got away from the rainy day fund.
That's where Bard's
No, we
going.
don't want a reserve for it. We've covered that in the unassigned and restricted fund policy that we just did.
Well,
It doesn't
so
have a physical fund.
that people will debate this, like you're holding on to all this money because of some other thing.
Mhm.
And it really is sort of code for, I'm putting money aside for something I expect to happen. It's not as explicit as our capital plan or other
Yeah.
reserves. But you could say, we want to put this into reserve. I don't think it'll fly. I'm just calling the question because the idea, we want to hold money for an event, but it's just sitting there as cash and unobligated. That is getting it clearly attention from at least some people.
Yeah, and I think that's where we used to have something called the rainy day fund that I think predates most people on this select board. And Sullivan and Powers advised that needed to go away because it wasn't an actual reserve fund.
It's just hoarding money.
It would, yeah, and then that's where, now that we've got the 15% of unassigned funds, because there are some people that are like, we'll spend it down to the bone. But we want to make sure we've got some money in there if there's a cash flow issue. And I think to have some money where we can get through some of these disasters. Now, if we have another disaster tomorrow, we're gonna probably need to borrow some money.
Yeah.
But if we have another disaster next summer, we'll see where we're at.
And the scale of the emergency.
Exactly.
If it's a $3 million problem, we're borrowing money, right?
Yeah.
No matter how much money we have. But right, if it's
Well,
$100,000 disaster, we can probably.
What
get
would
through it.
happen if we had another event now, because we're in the negative for the restricted? We can use unassigned for a FEMA event. And we did not do any provisions in that policy that we just signed to replenish these. So we're not raising dollars to replenishing these. We've just set a criteria by which we use it in a certain order down to the 15%. So we're not going to make any plans at negative 52,520. We're not making any plans to rebuild that. It's going to be at zero. It'll get zeroed out. That 52,520 will come out of the unassigned funds. And that's where it sits until we get FEMA money that builds it back up, because FEMA is specific to the restricted funds.
Part of it might be how many overlapping emergency expenditures do we want to plan for?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that kind of the question?
We've got nothing in the volcano fund, you know?
But I think that's where it comes back to, we want to keep that, if we keep that 15% in there,
That's good.
that gives us some buffer. And if it gets over that, we're into the loan territory.
Yeah.
At least that's how I.
And I
seeing
think
it.
that is the kind of conversation to have. The 15% isn't just because we want to sit on the money. It's not all just, can we make payroll next week? It is also the modest scale, unexpected expenditures
Yeah.
like FEMA events, climate events. I guess let's call them climate events, not FEMA events.
Mhm. Well, actually, that's a good idea because FEMA didn't create this stuff in the first place. You're right. People are moving to Vermont as a climate refuge because it's even worse, along the coast. Used to be in Maine. That wouldn't want to be right now. So it's
We're
it's
actually,
known by a lot of people that there's going to be more of this going on.
we're in the top 5 states
Mhm.
with FEMA events.
Since I've been on board, we've had a.
I have a labeling question under the tax rate estimate.
Yeah,
That summary table.
Yeah, that summary
You
table
actually make
under
information sheet
column
for that.
O.
I don't see.
You say town rate select board approved in 2021.
That are way overdue.
Somewhere recently.
We got a sheet for that too?
2023.
Similarly, down there, there's
We also got
July of 2022.
Yeah, 24. Thank you. Yeah, I think we need to make sure we
FEMA has
update
sheets
that.
for all of that.
That'll be 2025, actually. So I guess what do we want to use in this number here? Do we want this 386? Does that sound good? It keeps us at 6.45%. Do we want to?
That's an awfully rosy scenario. I don't feel comfortable with that.
Okay,
Saying that we're gonna get all this money in time for it to be useful during this budget cycle. I mean, what happens if we don't get it?
well, it's,
The yellow highlight.
yeah, I mean, I think we'll get, the only money that we're not really. So I look at this as like, this is money that we're
I know.
trying to make.
What if
This
we
is
actually
money that
do
we're gonna
fully staff the
save.
police department? We're betting that we're going to.
I think if,
There's no way we're gonna.
You'd be surprised. We've got 2 corporal candidates that could be, we've
yeah,
got some pretty solid leads.
I mean, right now, if we just took the first half expenses and projected those out, we'd be $325,000 underspent on the budget. So that 100,000 number is assuming that we're gonna spend $225,000 or more in 6 months.
Yeah, I really don't think so.
To be clear, these are all current fiscal year, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, the yellow is for current fiscal year.
So the hope is that if it doesn't, even if it doesn't come in this fiscal year, it could come in time to make a dent in the 24-25 money expenditure.
Well, the only of these 3 things that we're looking for money from the outside is the state portion of the Halloween flooding.
Mhm.
That's the 42,000. These other 2 are sort of they are.
Right, they are
They are
projected.
projected savings in FY 23 or projected overages on interest and projected savings in police. And I think that 100,000, I think that's fair. I think it's conservative. Even if we hire 2 corporals tomorrow, I don't think
It's
we're
only for
gonna.
6 months. I mean,
It's for 6 months.
You'd only be for 6 months, not a full year.
Well, this is sort of unfair, but where are we year to date, police budget versus actual,
Right,
the total?
yeah, year to date. That's that right here. So for the first 5.5 months, the police expenses are 176,424 on a total budget of 710,000.
That's like quite short,
It
We're,
is way short. Mhm.
or less than half.
We're way behind.
yeah,
Okay,
there's a lot of money there.
That's why I think 100,000, even that,
And we're not gonna suddenly double spend in the second half of the year.
You're right.
That
I
money
just,
is in the.
no, it's good to go through the exercise though, to understand where it came from, because I think that's important to do
I just
that.
tend to be very I prefer to be pessimistic about money and be pleasantly surprised if it turns out better.
Fair,
So that's why I focused on the police stuff, just because even though we're spending money at Heinsberg, the police chief is costing us less than a full-time chief in-house. We aren't spending on contracted services what we would spend if we were fully staffed. And every day that goes by, you accrue dollars.
Yeah, right.
And it's not like we're going to double staff in the second half of the year to make up for it. like that money is really booked. Unless there's some unexpected, like some equipment expenses, et cetera, that
Okay,
chip
So
away at it.
so when we're doing the budget when you're doing the budget presentation at town meeting, based on the way the police salary spending is trending, the 100,000 that you've got there, could be, I mean, that's the 2024-25 saving. But the
No,
mon-
this is
if
the
that-
savings for this current fiscal.
but
year.
you, based on what we just said, it could be much more, right?
Could be.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna have to be very clear that we're not trying to do smoke and mirrors. This kind of talk can make people very anxious to say, well, we think we're gonna have this. And we probably will. But we just want to make sure that when people get nervous when we say, trust us, it'll all work out.
No, I can share the numbers. Like, I think that was a good question. Where have we spent to date? What's the total budget? How far behind are we? Does that pan out?
And what
And
do we know and what don't we know? I think
And-
I appreciate you say what we don't know or
Yeah.
can't nail down.
And somebody's gonna say, why do we keep budgeting for a full police department and then having all this overage? And our response to that would be, well, since you mention it, we actually have decided to budget at a lower number to try to avoid this in the future. But we just have to have our deck of cards ready.
So I think 100 is an underestimate based on what we
Just saw,
discussed.
yeah, I agree.
And the interest received, that's sort of knowable, like year to date, what's the interest been over what's budgeted?
we've earned $75,000 in interest on a budget of $14,000 in interest for the year.
Is that a good rate of return?
I'll give you some of my own money.
Well, the budget, yeah.
I just did another 6-month CD and
Okay,
We did a $1
So-
million 6 months. Yes, I think you said.
Jay, I think where you're taking us is where does this lead us to a conclusion? And it would seem to me that it's plausible to take all that money and end up at the 6 point whatever percent.
and then just for, I don't like to use the phrase, okay, just for grins. You can probably guess what I was gonna say.
smiles.
Yeah, that's it. Let's say that current projections continue, we don't hire, we hire. What's the craziest outside of the envelope that we could wind up, based on your opinion, in terms of non-spending on police salaries? If we don't hire, maybe we hire one corporal, one officer. At the end of the fiscal year, how much will we have left? I mean, that would be a number just to throw it out there. What would that do to that tax rate? We don't want to spoil people by always saying we will always keep the track. We've had flat tax rate increases because we've had unassigned money to spend since I've been here. We know that that's not sustainable in perpetuity. We are going to have disasters. We are going to have. We're lucky we haven't had to pay for the funds of a lawsuit. You know, there are a lot of things that just. But we can say if we hire on January 1st, or by the time we're doing this, it'll be March 5th. If between now and the end of March, we don't hire anybody else. Let's say that on that date, we've hired a corporal and an officer, and we're continuing otherwise the same arrangement. On March 5th, we could say, if we do not hire anybody else this fiscal year, not that we don't want to, but if we don't, here's how much money we would have to put toward that, which would result in this tax rate. We need to be able to give them a concrete scenario.
That's, I think, to back up the 100,000 really.
Mhm.
And I think it's going to end up being more than 100.
Right, that's my point is,
Yeah.
if on March 5th, we take a snapshot, we say, this is how much we've got. This is how much we would continue to accrue if we keep current staffing levels. If it just happens to work out that way, what is that number? Plug that in, and then what does it do for the tax rate? And be honest about it.
Yeah.
Say we could hire 2 people tomorrow. We don't think we will, but we might. If we hire those, this would be the tax rate. If we don't hire those, this would be the tax rate. If the tax rate is calculated on July 1, we don't set it in stone the day of town meeting.
Well, it would be optimistic to think we are hiring 2 people January 1st, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So the first half of the year is basically in the books.
Right. By March 5th, it's even more.
Yeah.
So I think by the time we're doing this presentation, we will either hire some people or we won't, but we'll probably have a pretty good idea what the pipeline is. I think by March 5th, we'll be able to have a reasonably good forecast of what the total salary savings for the year will be. But I think we should offer them two numbers. Here's if we keep current staffing as of March 5th till the end of the fiscal year, and here's if we hire two more people. This would result in this tax rate, this would result in this.
I think it's a good idea. I think for budget building purposes, we might come up with an assumption, which is that mid course. And say, based on year to date, we know this through December. And then projected through the rest of the year, because we're gonna have to close this out pretty soon, leads to this amount of anticipated unexpended revenues in the police department by the end of the year, and that we convert that over. And traditionally, we waited a year for that to happen. And so this is just kind of front loading it because it's so significant. And the combination of that and the FEMA money, which is like taken off our books and sits over there until someday we get it back.
Right. Connie, you've had your hand up. I apologize.
That's okay. I want to throw another wrinkle into this discussion, and really, I don't know how to approach this. But one of the things as we look at the interest, we're definitely going to be way over than we planned for fiscal year 24. However, in fiscal year 25, we need to remember our cash flow is going to be impacted because we are raising 500,000 less in taxes than we need to cover the highway budget. So our cash flow is going to go down by 500,000 right there. But also we have the 2 Bridge Street sidewalk projects going in that I know is going to be ARPA and grants, but those are reimbursable grants. So that 80%, we're going to be paying out of pocket and waiting for that to come back. So with that said, those 2 things alone really reduce our cash flow at any given point by about $1 million. I mean, we still have plenty, but we need to consider anything that's reimbursable. It's just really unpredictable as to how quickly we'll get it back.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
one of the things that confuses me is the difference between the change in our expenses, which right now we're at 4.5%, and the change in the tax rate, which is at over 6%. And this, that it can't be just, the veterans, the property tax savings for the veterans. I don't understand why it seems to me the thing that we are working hard on are the expenses. The other stuff is just different. I mean, believe me, for the school budget, it's way harder. It's like incomprehensibly harder because it's per pupil costs and
Act 147 and
it's really a mess. But the thing that you have control over is what you're spending money on. And 4.5% increase is really not much. I think that's where we're at, right? We're at about 4.5%, 5%. Is that what it is? What's the bottom line we got here?
5%.
5%.
Yeah, 5% after a couple of years of it being relatively flat.
Yeah.
And after a once in 1,000 year, once every 5 year disaster.
So what do you want to do with this number here for now, for next time?
I think we can leave the number plugged in now.
The 386.
But realize that as town meeting day gets closer, we will have a better idea of what that number may look like.
I think another thing that we might do, which I don't think is a significant investment of time, is say, what's year-to-date budget for police? Year-to-date actual, A minus B equals C. That's money that should be bookable.
Yeah.
Anticipating we will still be underspent for a period of time through the duration of the year.
Yeah.
I think it is plausible to say we're booking all that money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to, because basically that number right now is the $325,000. If we sort of projected out what we have already spent at the same rate. But I do want to be, so that's why I say 100,000 is conservative, because we are overspending in supplies. And if we do, when we do hire officers, that number is going to go up higher.
So 325 is estimated year end.
325 would be if we took the first 5.5 months of spending and just projected that as a flat spending over the rest of the year.
Yeah, so I was just saying the first 5.5 months, that's something like 150.
No, that's what I'm saying. Sorry. I'm saying if we take the monthly spending for the first 5.5 months and project it over 12 months, that the full budget minus that figure is 325 at the end of the fiscal
That's
year.
probably not terrific because, we didn't have Anthony for the entire,
Right.
For the entire 5 months.
Yep.
And we might want to use him more.
Yeah.
Then, so it's an hourly rate.
Right.
Or where is
No,
it?
we changed that agreement to a flat monthly rate.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
half
but
this time.
But it's still gonna go, it's still gonna, yeah, that's projectable, but yeah, I mean, hiring new officers, that'll go up. New supplies, that'll go up, and both of those,
And contracted services will go down.
if we hire more officers, yes, so there'll be a little bit of savings there, so.
My thought is, I don't even want to talk about the future. I want to talk about the past. What
Okay.
have we saved
So
year
far.
to date?
Yeah,
That's money like in the bank, and leave the rest of the year's budget alone.
yeah, so if you look at that,
5 months, so it
Um,
should have been about 700.
that's 710, 61. Times-
Oh, yeah. What about the revenue from the cruiser we saw?
They're both stripped and ready to sell, right?
One is sold, the other one is being sold.
Yay. How much we got?
Hold on 1 second, those numbers. Okay, so real quick, Bard, looking at it this way,
So it said.
our expenses so far through 5.5 months are $176,000. That could, sorry, no, let me start from a different point. Our budget is $710,000 for the full 12 months. Through 5.5 months, if you prorate that over 5.5 months, that is $325,444 should have been spent in 5.5 months. In 5.5 months, we actually spent $176,000. So that savings is $149,000.
I'm saying we can bank 150 from the police department,
Okay,
because that's like, in a couple of weeks, it's gonna be over 150.
Right, and
And that's real money.
we
and-
have some control of the outcome too. So
And the rest of the year, there's gonna be some ups and downs, but we're not gonna suddenly fill every position.
Oh, you're
January
right.
First. So there's still gonna be some accrued savings, but I'd leave that alone. I just say, what do we have booked? I think it's 150.
So do you want to change this number?
I do. I would put 150
So if we
as
put- if
savings
we put
year to date.
150, if we put 150 here,
That's 15,000.
yeah, I got you. So that's 780, 716.
And I think, but before you move on, for vacancy savings in police budget,
Oh,
I
wait.
would say, actual first half of the year or something like that.
As of,
Yeah.
as of
so that would
December
be-
31st.
I'll just make a little note based on first half.
Half a year. Five, 6 months, but just say 6, it's just through the end of the year, through December 31st.
I'll just- Sorry, I'm gonna make the same notations I've been making here. Come on. Gotta slow down and go fast here.
All right, now you're
It's,
doing great.
you're type faster than
436,
I do when somebody's-
064. So if we go to 436. 064. Hopefully my formulas haven't completely left the building. Where that gets to 5, and
Our
Bard
work
has
is done.
dropped his mic.
5%.
How does the rest of the board feel about Bard's mic?
We need to.
I feel
find
better than 12.
0.8% somewhere.
Read what? 0.8%.
So then that's
At the
almost
cell phone.
exactly the same as the budget increase, right?
Actually, I think we're close. By 0.03.
Look at that.
David, can I get 0.05?
Josh, I'm impressed at your ability to fill in a spreadsheet as we're all throwing numbers at you and your formulas and tabulating.
Well,
That's pretty
That's fine.
awesome. So,
sort of like my World Series here.
Next year it'll be 1.7.
this one more time, but we.
7%?
So
Going
I have a
down, huh?
suggestion. I think this looks good to me. It's like worked out better than I thought, frankly.
Yeah,
And perhaps we need a short meeting to just come back, make sure there's no errors, omissions.
We could tack that on. Right now, next meeting's agenda is not ridiculous.
There's a couple items that could go long, but
They
we could
could.
also say, hey, we only got 20 minutes tonight. And we could put the budget. I think it may be a half hour of like looking at some final numbers, seeing where we're at. I don't. it
Plus the
may not
executive
even be-
session.
May
but-
not even be that long.
And we get more people if we put it at the front end. We
Put
get
the
more
budget up
people
front?
listening.
To put the budget at the top.
Yeah,
It's an
Yep.
idea.
What was the increase for this fiscal year? Last March?
5%.
So there is the difference between what was, like, what did we go to the voters with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, good percent.
Yeah, I hesitate to save anything, but I'm gonna save this.
Oh, that's an
Is
old.
it gonna go away on me?
The past year.
Hey, it stayed. I think it was something about referencing the other sheet.
No, 21.
Sorry, let me find, Connie has her hand up. If you wanna go to her,
Connie,
while I'm looking for stuff.
I don't know why it says that.
So just for clarification, we're gonna use option 3 of the police options.
right?
And you want me to leave the capital reserves as doing these without loans?
Yes.
So I'm gonna start digging more into that Excel spreadsheet a lot, and then I'll start working on the narrative with the department heads.
So Lisa, looking back at last year's estimated tax rate for 2024 was 3.67% increase over the prior year. And that was with the $500,000 in direct offset. So.
I'd like to see.
And the reason we were able to achieve it is we are sort of front loading it this time, rather than waiting for the end of the year and then it goes into next year. So this,
Yeah.
at some point,
not
it
gonna happen
catches
next
up
year.
to us.
It's not gonna
Like,
happen next year.
you know, if we are fully staffed with the police, we're not gonna have 300,000 or 400,000. to throw.
On the other hand, if we're fully staffed with the police, I won't be able to stop grinning, so whatever.
But
Just
yeah,
the
at
idea of
some
having a
point,
police
the
staff.
unassigned and restricted funds are gonna run out.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, if we get reimbursed by FEMA by this time next year, we might still be able to do this for FY 26. But FY 27, honestly, could be where we start to have to pay the piper.
On the other hand, health insurance companies could start giving coverage for free. We just don't know.
The other thing that I was conscious of to try to hit this, our target, is there are other items at play, both the school budget, which is
Yeah.
gonna be ugly,
Overshadowed this way.
and the
Will.
town center building vote.
I know.
Those are real money.
Mhm.
Those things, I know, they're gonna be hanging over like storm clouds no matter what we come up with. The lower we can get, the better I feel.
I really don't, I really do not envy the school board finance committee for the work. I mean, I went to their meetings. I'm like, oh my God. This is like time to change your name and flee the country because they're up against a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were some sidebar conversations at that legislative breakfast about that, like, it's possible to get sucked along into the sort of contrails of that. Like, did the voters just vote everything down?
Right.
Mhm.
Like,
They get a bad taste in their mouth. And it's.
you know, I think the schools, it's a tough sell, but, it's clear for us to try to hit this responsible point, and I think we're probably there.
Yeah.
But we have a big ask. There are a couple of other towns that have big bond votes also, and they were looking a little skittish, like, you know, how much money are people going to support, even for a worthy cause?
I think though, to be honest, the data that Jeff will be able to give them on A, the decrepitude of this building, and B, the cost saving measures built into the new plan make this a very different scenario than let's build a giant police department up in Browns Court that we don't need.
Next to the affordable housing.
Yeah, that would have been.
Connie has her hand up.
Connie,
Get the affordable housing, why don't we?
No, I mean, I think you guys are hitting on this because this extra money is really going to disappear by 27, and that's when that bond will kick in as well. So that is going to be a rough year, but I'll be retired by then. But I think one thing that will really help is if we find some way to really convey, people get their tax bill and they really don't think of it as the school versus the town. They just think it's the town. And it's the staff in the town center that catches heck for that. So maybe we really make it really clear to people when we're talking that this portion is the town.
I had a similar conversation with some other town folks at that legislative breakfast, and you know, we live in parallel universes. They're saying the same thing, and the challenge is they write a check. And so I think this is sort of a communications challenge. I don't know what percentage of people writing those checks grasp the school versus municipal.
Less than half.
It gets glossed over. And so I think it's worth contemplating, Connie, how do we communicate that without sort of pushing school under the school bus?
We don't have buses.
So are we at a point?
do we want to adjourn?
Move
Yeah.
to adjourn.
Okay, we have motion from David Sanders, seconded by Bart Hill to adjourn. Any discussion? Seeing none, please state your name and your vote.
Bart,
Jeff, aye.
David, I.
Jay, I. Connie and Jeff, and Josh, thank you. I know this is a lot of work. And people tend not to thank you at town meeting for all the work you did, but thank you.
And thank you.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you.